in the ancient land of Egypt, where the golden rays of the sun fell upon timeless monuments and the great Nile flowed as the lifeblood of a civilization steeped in mystery and majesty. A legend was quietly taking shape. It was a time when the boundaries between the divine and the mortal blurred, when gods walked among men and destiny was woven into the very fabric of daily life. In this realm of sand, stone, and eternal myth, two souls were fated to converge, one that would become a symbol of wisdom and resilience, and another whose youthful vigor would challenge the course of an entire dynasty. This is the story of Neith, a woman whose enigmatic origins and quiet strength would one day echo through the halls of history, and of Pepi II, a pharaoh whose remarkably long reign was as much defined by his own determination as by the extraordinary influence of the queen beside him. From the earliest hours of dawn, when the horizon blushed with the promise of a new day, the desert seemed to whisper secrets of the past. The shifting sands, laden with the memories of countless generations, bore silent witness to the rise and fall of empires. It was against this mesmerizing backdrop that Neith's journey began. Born into a world where destiny was often written in the stars and the gods were believed to guide the fortunes of men, Neith's life was destined to be intertwined with the celestial tapestry of ancient Egypt. Though details of her early life have faded with time, the echoes of her origins speak of a noble lineage and a mind that shone as brightly as the morning sun. In the humble quarters of her childhood home, nestled along the fertile banks of the Nile, Neith learned from an early age that knowledge was a treasure far more enduring than gold. Her family, known for its piety and scholarly pursuits, imbued her with a reverence for the sacred lore of their people. The elders spoke of the great goddess Neith, an embodiment of war, wisdom, and weaving, whose name resonated deeply with those who sought guidance in times of strife. It was said that the goddess's spirit lingered in the hearts of those destined for greatness, and many came to believe that the queen-to-be had inherited not only her name but also the indomitable spirit of the deity. As a child, Neith would sit for hours in the cool shade of date palms, her ears absorbing the ancient chants and stories recited by her elders. These tales, passed down from generation to generation, spoke of creation, cosmic order, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. The rhythmic cadence of these stories wove themselves into the fabric of her being, nurturing within her an intrinsic understanding of balance and harmony. In the quiet solitude of those formative years, while the bustling world outside moved to the relentless beat of the Nile, a spark of destiny was being kindled, a spark that would eventually grow into the blazing flame of leadership and vision. Far from the gentle murmurs of Neith's early life, on the other side of the great river, a very different story was unfolding. In the grand palace of Memphis, beneath soaring columns adorned with hieroglyphics and intricate carvings, a young pharaoh was coming into his own. Pepi II, though barely a youth himself, had already been thrust into a realm of immense responsibility, ascending to the throne at an age when many are still grappling with the simplest of lessons. He was tasked with the colossal duty of preserving an empire whose legacy was as ancient as the pyramids that stood sentinel over the desert. The weight of the crown, though heavy in its symbolism, was matched by the formidable challenges of leadership in a world defined by both divine mandate and the ever-changing currents of mortal ambition. Pepi II's early reign was marked by both promise and peril. Surrounded by seasoned advisors, military strategists, and priestly figures who wielded influence as potent as any scepter, he was acutely aware that his youth could be seen as a vulnerability. Yet, beneath the surface of his apparent inexperience, there flickered a determination to forge a new path, a path that would blend the revered traditions of his forefathers with innovative ideas suited to the evolving needs of his people. The royal court, with its lavish ceremonies and intricate rituals, was a stage upon which the dramas of power and destiny were played out daily. It was in this charged atmosphere that the paths of Pepi II and Neith were destined to cross. The meeting of these two remarkable individuals was not a matter of mere chance. It was the culmination of a confluence of forces, political necessity, divine will, and the subtle machinations of fate, as the pharaoh's court buzzed with anticipation and the murmur of diplomatic overtures. Neith emerged not merely as a consort but as a partner whose intellect and insight were as formidable as any warrior on the battlefield. Her arrival at the palace was heralded by whispers of destiny and quiet admiration from those who recognized in her a rare blend of beauty and brains, a combination that promised to usher in a new era of enlightened rule. In the early days of their union, the palace became a crucible of transformation. The youthful pharaoh, whose gaze often betrayed the weight of his responsibilities, found in Neith a steadying presence, a beacon of calm amid the swirling currents of courtly intrigue. She was not content to simply occupy the role of a silent observer. Rather, she engaged actively in the affairs of state, offering counsel on matters of diplomacy, religion, and governance. Her suggestions, often couched in the language of ancient wisdom and tempered by a modern sense of practicality, resonated deeply with those who sought not only to preserve Egypt's grandeur but to ensure its future prosperity. The influence of Neith extended far beyond the confines of the royal court. In a society where tradition and ritual formed the backbone of everyday life, her intellect and sensitivity began to permeate all aspects of governance. She was a frequent visitor to the temples of the gods, where she engaged with priests and scholars, seeking to understand the deeper currents that flowed beneath the surface of human existence. In these sacred spaces, where the veils between the mortal and the divine were thought to be thinnest, she found inspiration and solace. Her interactions with the clergy were marked by a mutual respect, a recognition that true leadership required a harmonious balance between earthly power and spiritual insight. As the seasons passed and the Nile swelled with renewed vigor after the annual inundation, Neith's presence in the palace became ever more indispensable. The challenges facing Egypt were as diverse as they were daunting: shifting alliances with neighboring kingdoms, the ever-present threat of internal discord, and the monumental task of ensuring that the legacy of the pharaohs would endure for millennia. In the midst of these uncertainties, the union of Neith and Pepi II emerged as a symbol of hope and renewal. Their partnership was emblematic of a deeper truth, that the strength of a civilization rested not solely on the might of its rulers, but on the wisdom and foresight of those who guided them. In the intricate dance of power and destiny, every decision, every whispered conversation in the shadowed halls of the palace, and every subtle gesture in the royal gardens contributed to the unfolding tapestry of history. Neith, with her keen mind and compassionate heart, was at the center of this delicate balance. She was a woman of quiet conviction, whose every action was guided by an unwavering belief in the possibility of a better future. Whether negotiating the terms of a delicate alliance, offering solace in times of sorrow, or championing reforms that would benefit the common people, she demonstrated time and again that true leadership was as much about empathy and understanding as it was about authority and control. The legacy of Neith was to be written not in the bold strokes of conquest or the fleeting glories of battle, but in the subtle, enduring impact of her counsel and care. Her influence was felt in the reforms she championed, measures that improved the lives of ordinary Egyptians, fostered artistic and intellectual growth, and fortified the spiritual foundations of a society in constant flux. In an age where the monumental achievements of kings were celebrated with grandiose inscriptions and towering statues, Neith's contributions were etched into the hearts of her people in quieter, yet no less profound, ways. Her wisdom was a lamp that illuminated the dark corridors of uncertainty, guiding her nation through times of both prosperity and peril. Even as the years passed and the great pharaoh's reign stretched on, the bond between Neith and Pepi II deepened. Their relationship was a testament to the power of partnership, a union where each complementing strength mitigated the other's vulnerabilities. In moments of private reflection, away from the prying eyes of the court, they would share their dreams and fears, forging an unspoken understanding that transcended the formalities of royal protocol. For Pepi II, the challenges of leadership were often overwhelming, and it was in these quiet moments with Neith that he found the resolve to continue. For Neith, The complexities of statecraft were tempered by the knowledge that her influence could bring about positive change, not just for the elite but for every citizen of Egypt. Throughout the early years of their reign, the palace became a microcosm of the broader transformations occurring throughout the kingdom. The rigid hierarchies of the past began to show signs of flexibility as new ideas took root. Ideas that championed progress and reform without discarding the cherished traditions of old. Neith played a crucial role in this evolution, drawing upon the deep reservoirs of knowledge accumulated through years of study and reflection. She introduced subtle yet transformative changes to the administrative apparatus of the state. Her reforms were not radical in the sense of upending the established order. Rather, they were the gentle modifications that allowed the ancient machinery of governance to operate with renewed efficiency and compassion. The intellectual salons and private gatherings that Neith hosted within the palace walls soon became renowned throughout Egypt. Scholars, poets, and artists were drawn to these intimate circles of conversation, where ideas flowed as freely as the sacred waters of the Nile. In these gatherings, the barriers between social classes began to blur. The king's advisors, the temple priests, and even humble scribes would engage in dialogues that spanned the realms of philosophy, science, and art. It was in this rarefied atmosphere that the seeds of intellectual revival were sown. A revival that would eventually influence not only the policies of Pepi II's reign, but also the cultural legacy of Egypt for generations to come. Yet, for all the progress and intellectual ferment that characterized this period, the political landscape remained as treacherous as the shifting desert sands. External threats loomed large on the horizon, with rival kingdoms and nomadic tribes eyeing the wealth and resources of Egypt with covetous intent. Diplomatic missions were dispatched, alliances forged and broken, and the specter of conflict hovered over even the most peaceful days. In these trying times, the steady hand of Neith was indispensable. Her keen insight into the motives of both friend and foe allowed her to advise Pepi II with a clarity that often made the difference between crisis and stability. With the patience of one who has mastered the art of listening and the wisdom of one who has seen the ebb and flow of fortune, she navigated the labyrinthine corridors of power with a grace that belied the harsh realities of the world outside the palace walls. As the sun rose and set over the sprawling metropolis of Memphis, casting long shadows over its grand temples and bustling marketplaces, the people of Egypt began to feel the subtle but transformative influence of their rulers. The reforms initiated under the quiet guidance of Neith began to take effect. Agricultural practices improved, trade routes were secured, and the cultural life of the nation flourished. In the daily rhythms of life along the Nile, the legacy of a wise queen was quietly being etched into the collective memory of a civilization that had already endured millennia. In the eyes of the common people, the palace was no longer a distant, inaccessible realm of power but a living entity that cared for their well-being. Nurtured by the hands of leaders who understood that the strength of a nation lay in the unity of its people. Even as the early chapters of this storied reign unfolded, whispers of the future began to circulate among the scribes and seers who chronicled the affairs of state. They spoke of a time when the union of Neith and Pepi II would not only secure the present but lay the foundation for a legacy that would resonate through the ages. In hushed tones, in the quiet sanctuaries of temple and tomb, the idea took shape that the true measure of greatness was not merely in the longevity of one's reign, but in the lasting impact one's wisdom and compassion could have on the world. It was a notion that, though abstract and lofty, found a tangible embodiment in the life of the queen who had become both muse and mentor to a generation. In the twilight hours, when the desert cooled and the stars began to emerge, casting their ancient light upon the land, Neith would often retreat to a quiet corner of the palace's gardens. There, amid the delicate fragrance of blooming lotus and the gentle rustle of papyrus leaves, she would reflect on the myriad challenges that lay ahead. The burdens of leadership, though shared with the Pharaoh, were hers to bear as well, a silent responsibility that weighed on her heart even as it fueled her determination. In these solitary moments, the silent dialogues between her mortal soul and the immortal whispers of the gods seemed to merge, providing her with a reservoir of strength that would sustain her through the trials of empire. The early days of this epic journey were marked by both triumph and tension, hope and uncertainty. Every decree issued, every diplomatic envoy sent, and every reform enacted was a testament to the collaborative spirit that had come to define this unique period in Egyptian history. The people, though often caught in the currents of change, began to see in the leadership of Neith and Pepi II a promise that the glory of Egypt was not confined to the grand monuments of stone, but was also alive in the hearts and minds of those who toiled to bring about a brighter future. As the narrative of their reign continued to unfold against the vast backdrop of history, it became increasingly clear that the legacy of Neith was destined to outlast the fleeting concerns of mortal ambition. Her influence, subtle yet far-reaching, was a force that transcended the immediate realm of politics and seeped into every facet of Egyptian life, from the vibrant festivals that celebrated the turning of the seasons to the quiet, determined labor of farmers along the fertile banks of the Nile. In every corner of the kingdom, the gentle touch of her wisdom could be felt, a quiet reminder that true power was as much about nurturing the spirit of a people as it was about commanding an empire. And so, as the sun set over a land of ancient wonder and boundless mystery, the story of Neith and her profound impact on Egypt began its long, measured progression into legend. The early years of their union were not defined by the dramatic clashes of armies or the tumult of revolution, but by a series of subtle, deliberate choices, a series of moments where compassion met strategy, where wisdom was chosen over brute strength, and where the gentle guidance of a single individual reshaped the destiny of an entire nation. It was a time when the corridors of power were filled not only with the clamor of ambition but with the quiet, resonant notes of a legacy that was being composed one thoughtful act at a time. In the grand narrative of Egyptian history, where the names of kings and gods are inscribed in stone for eternity, the early chapter of Neith's life stands as a testament to the enduring nature of subtle influence. It is a story of a queen who, with grace and intellect, redefined what it meant to be a partner in power. Her legacy is not one of conquest alone, but of transformation, a transformation that left its mark not only on the institutions of state but on the very soul of a civilization. It is a story that invites us to look beyond the superficial trappings of power and to consider instead the quiet virtues of empathy, wisdom, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. As the first light of dawn once again crept over the horizon, bathing the ancient city of Memphis in a soft, golden glow, the promise of a new day resonated with the echoes of the past. The enduring spirit of Egypt, nurtured by the wisdom of its rulers and the steadfast devotion of its people, was ready to face the challenges of a changing world. In this moment, on the brink of both continuity and transformation, the legend of Neith was firmly taking root, a legend that would grow to encompass not just the grandeur of a pharaoh's reign, but the intricate, interwoven destinies of an entire nation. In the silent majesty of that ancient dawn, as the first rays of sunlight danced upon the rippling surface of the Nile and the distant call of a temple priest echoed across the desert, one could almost hear the faint murmur of destiny. It was the murmur of a people who believed that greatness could arise from the most unassuming of beginnings, that the power to shape the future resided in the hearts of those who dared to dream, and that even in a world defined by the immutable laws of fate, the choices of a single individual could alter the course of history. In the life of Neith, all these truths were embodied, her journey a living testament to the idea that the strength of a civilization was measured not merely in the monuments it built, but in the lasting imprint of wisdom and compassion upon the soul of its people. Thus, as the ancient city awoke to a new day, the story of Neith was just beginning to unfold, a story that would span decades, influence generations, and become one of the most enduring legends of Egypt. In the quiet resolve of a woman who dared to challenge the confines of tradition. In the gentle counsel she offered to a young pharaoh burdened by the weight of destiny. And in the subtle reforms that rippled outward to touch every corner of the kingdom, there was the promise of an empire renewed. And it is in that promise, a promise forged in the silent communion between a queen and her people, that the true legacy of ancient Egypt lies. As we step further into the unfolding epic of Neith's life, it is impossible not to marvel at the delicate interplay of forces that brought her into existence. From the sacred halls of temple to the grand corridors of the royal palace, every moment, every gesture, was imbued with meaning. The echoes of ancient chants and the timeless wisdom of a civilization long past converged in the heart of a woman whose quiet strength would one day leave an indelible mark upon history. Here, at the dawn of a new era, the story of a queen, one of intellect, resilience, and unwavering compassion, begins to shine like the first light of day, promising that even in the vast tapestry of time, the gentle force of true leadership endures. In this chapter of beginnings, as the pages of history turn slowly yet inexorably toward the future, the legacy of Neith takes its first measured steps. It is a legacy not defined solely by the grandeur of empire or the might of armies, but by the transformative power of ideas and the enduring strength of the human spirit. With each new sunrise over the timeless desert, as the ancient monuments stood witness to the unfolding drama of life and destiny, the promise of a better, more compassionate world was quietly affirmed. In the interplay of destiny and free will, in the fusion of divine inspiration and mortal ambition, the early legend of Neith was born, a legend destined to echo through the corridors of time and to inspire all those who dare to believe that one life, when guided by wisdom and heart, can change the fate of nations. And so, in the quiet majesty of that ancient dawn, as the golden light of the rising sun embraced the land of Egypt, the legend of Neith, an enduring testament to the power of subtle influence and the eternal quest for a brighter future, was set firmly in motion. Her story, like the gentle flow of the Nile itself, would continue to nourish the spirit of a civilization, a spirit that endures to this very day in the hearts of those who remember that true greatness is measured not in the fleeting glories of conquest, but in the lasting beauty of wisdom, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of peace. Thus begins the long, intricate tale of a queen whose quiet power reshaped the destiny of a nation, a tale of love, sacrifice, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. In the soft glow of that first morning light, amidst the echoes of ancient hymns and the timeless pulse of the Nile, Neith's journey had only just begun, destined to become a legend that would forever illuminate the annals of history. The story of Neith's origins begins long before she graced the royal palace as a revered consort, and even before the eyes of destiny took note of her burgeoning potential. In a time when the gentle murmur of the Nile was both the lifeblood and the storyteller of ancient Egypt, the sands themselves bore witness to the nascent days of a girl destined to alter the course of a kingdom. Her early years unfolded in a modest village along the fertile banks of the great river, a place where the rhythms of nature and tradition intertwined, and where every sunrise carried with it the promise of renewal and quiet miracles. Neith was born into a world steeped in mysticism and ancient wisdom. Her family, though not of the highest aristocratic rank, was respected in their community for their piety, knowledge, and unwavering commitment to the old ways. The walls of her family's humble abode were adorned with simple yet meaningful symbols, charms and talismans invoking blessings from the gods, and delicate amulets believed to channel the divine energies of Isis, Osiris, and, most significantly, the goddess whose name she would one day share, Neith, the divine weaver and warrior. Even as an infant, the gentle cadence of sacred hymns and the rustling prayers of her elders seemed to envelop her, as if the gods themselves had whispered her destiny into being. From her earliest moments, Neith was recognized by those around her as a child touched by something beyond the ordinary. Her eyes, deep and reflective as the midnight sky over the Nile, absorbed every detail of the world around her with an intensity that belied her tender years. In the cool embrace of early morning, as the village awoke to the soft lapping of the river and the first light of dawn caressed the horizon, Neith would sit silently at her mother's side. There, amidst the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil and the faint, sacred incense drifting from a nearby shrine. She learned the language of the land, an unspoken dialogue between nature, humanity, and the divine. Her mother, a woman of quiet strength and profound spirituality, became Neith's first teacher. With gentle hands and a soft, unwavering voice, she recounted ancient tales of creation and cosmic balance, stories that had been passed down through countless generations. Under the tender tutelage of her mother, the young Neith discovered that the natural world was not merely a backdrop for human existence, but a living, breathing tapestry woven with divine purpose. She learned to discern the subtle messages of the wind as it swept over the river, the silent counsel of the date palms that swayed in rhythm with the seasons, and the wisdom hidden in the patterns of the stars that glittered overhead each night. These early lessons, imparted in the quiet intimacy of family life, laid the groundwork for a lifelong quest for understanding, a quest that would one day elevate her from a simple village girl to a key figure in the unfolding drama of Egyptian history. The village in which Neith grew up was a microcosm of ancient Egyptian life, a place where every ritual, every communal gathering, was imbued with the sacred. The people here honored the cycles of nature with fervor and gratitude, celebrating the annual inundation of the Nile as a divine gift and the source of their prosperity. Neith's childhood was punctuated by these communal festivities, a time of joy, reverence, and the unbridled expression of cultural identity. During the grand celebrations, the air would be filled with the strains of lyres and flutes, and the scent of lotus blossoms mingled with the aroma of freshly baked bread and spiced delicacies. In these moments, the girl learned the value of community, the importance of tradition, and the enduring strength that could be found in unity. Yet, life in the village was not without its hardships. The people were intimately acquainted with the caprices of nature, for the same river that sustained them could also, in times of drought or flood, challenge their very existence. In these testing periods, the elders would gather in the cool, shaded courtyards of the village temple to offer prayers to the gods, seeking their favor and intervention. It was during these moments of collective vulnerability that Neith's keen sense of empathy began to blossom. Even as a child, she was moved by the struggles of her neighbors, the weary farmer whose eyes betrayed the burden of a failed harvest, the elderly woman whose fragile form was bent with the weight of loss, and the children whose laughter had faded under the shadow of hardship. These experiences would plant within her the seeds of compassion and a determination to seek solutions that balanced practicality with mercy. Neith's education extended far beyond the tales recited by her mother. Recognizing her extraordinary curiosity and aptitude for learning, the village priest, a man of learned wisdom and gentle authority, took her under his wing. In the sanctuary of a modest temple dedicated to Thoth, the deity of wisdom, writing, and magic, Neith learned to read and write, to decipher the hieroglyphs that chronicled the mythic exploits of gods and heroes alike. The cool, hushed interiors of the temple became her second home, a place where the mysteries of the universe were carefully inscribed on stone and papyrus. Under Thoth's watchful guidance, Neith developed not only a mastery of the sacred script, but also an understanding of the deeper meanings hidden behind the symbols, a skill that would later prove invaluable in deciphering the subtle nuances of courtly intrigue and political discourse. In those formative years, the young girl's days were a blend of rigorous study, quiet contemplation, and joyful participation in the simple pleasures of village life. The afternoons were often spent by the river's edge, where the gentle current carried with it stories of distant lands and the promise of adventures yet to come. Here, amid the verdant banks and shimmering waters, Neith would lose herself in dreams of a broader world, a world where the lessons of the past could illuminate the uncertain paths of the future. Her imagination, nourished by the rich oral traditions and the timeless beauty of her surroundings, began to take shape as a quiet yet insistent voice within her, urging her to question, to learn, and to aspire to greatness. As Neith matured, her reputation as an inquisitive and gifted child spread beyond the boundaries of her small village. Travelers and merchants, passing through on their way to the grand centers of Egyptian civilization. Spoke in hushed tones of a young girl with eyes that shone like polished onyx, a girl whose mind was as sharp as the finest chisel and whose heart was as receptive as the gentle banks of the Nile. These whispered accolades, though delivered in passing, hinted at a destiny that transcended the modest confines of her birthplace. It was said that the girl possessed an innate ability to perceive the deeper truths hidden behind everyday occurrences, and that her intuitive grasp of the natural and spiritual worlds set her apart from her peers. In a society that revered the wisdom of its elders and the sacred knowledge of its priests, Neith's burgeoning talents were recognized as a rare gift, a gift that would, in time, shape the destiny of her people. Yet, even as the seeds of her potential were nurtured by the love and guidance of her family and community, there were whispers among the more superstitious that the child was touched by the gods themselves. Some claimed that, on the night of her birth, the heavens had opened with an otherworldly radiance, and that a brilliant star had blazed a path across the firmament, a celestial omen that heralded the arrival of one who would carry the divine spark into the heart of Egypt. These tales, passed down through generations, would become a part of the collective mythos surrounding Neith, a mythos that imbued her early life with an air of mysticism and an expectation of greatness that reached far beyond the simple rhythms of village existence. As the seasons turned and the cycles of the Nile continued their eternal dance, Neith's path began to diverge from that of her childhood. The transition was gradual yet unmistakable, a slow, unfolding metamorphosis from a curious girl into a poised and determined young woman. Her experiences in the temple under the tutelage of the priest of Thoth had not only equipped her with the tools of literacy and learning, but had also instilled in her a profound sense of duty to preserve and enhance the wisdom of her people. She came to understand that knowledge was not a static treasure to be hoarded, but a dynamic force meant to be shared, nurtured, and used to elevate the human spirit. In this light, every lesson learned, every hymn chanted, and every ritual performed was an act of devotion to a future that held the promise of transformation. In the quiet intervals between her studies and the bustling activities of village life, Neith found solace in nature, the sprawling fields, the gentle rustle of papyrus reeds along the riverbank, and the distant silhouettes of ancient monuments stirred something deep within her, a yearning to understand not only the world as it was, but also the forces that shaped it. It was during these moments of introspection that she began to form her own ideas about the nature of power and the responsibilities that accompanied it. In the soft glow of twilight, as the sky blushed with the hues of dusk and the first stars emerged one by one, Neith would ponder the great cycles of life and death, creation and destruction, order and chaos. These meditations, quiet yet persistent, laid the intellectual foundation for the reforms and innovations she would later champion in the corridors of royal power. Despite the idyllic simplicity of village life, the shadow of political and social change was never far from Neith's consciousness. Tales of distant kingdoms, of mighty pharaohs and their legendary exploits, filtered through the narrow lanes of her community like desert winds. Although these stories were often recounted as myth and legend, they carried within them the seeds of ambition and the possibility of a larger stage upon which her destiny might be played. The whispers of change, of shifting alliances, rising dynasties, and the inexorable passage of time instilled in her a sense of urgency to learn, to adapt, and to prepare herself for the day when her path would lead her far beyond the familiar fields of her home. In the gentle tutelage of her family and the broader community, Neith also absorbed lessons in resilience and perseverance. Life in ancient Egypt, though abundant in natural beauty and spiritual richness, was also a life marked by cycles of challenge and renewal. Every hardship, from the sting of a drought to the sorrow of a lost harvest, was met with a collective determination to rebuild and to honor the natural order of the land. This ingrained ethos of endurance became a cornerstone of Neith's character. Even as a child, she learned that setbacks were not failures but opportunities for growth, and that the true measure of one's worth was found not in the absence of adversity, but in the grace with which one faced it. As Neith's reputation grew, so too did the recognition of her unique abilities by those in positions of influence. Local elders, who had long served as the custodians of tradition, began to see in her a fresh perspective, a balance between the revered customs of old and a bold curiosity for the new. They spoke of her as a beacon of hope, a young mind whose insights transcended the limitations of her rural surroundings. These accolades, though modest in the eyes of the world beyond, fueled her determination to strive for excellence. The lessons learned in the quiet solitude of the village, beneath the ever-watchful gaze of both mortal and divine, were to become the guiding principles of her later life. By the time Neith reached her adolescence, her transformation was complete. No longer was she merely the inquisitive child who absorbed the ancient lore of her people. She had become a young woman of striking intellect, unwavering resolve, and an empathetic spirit that belied her years. Her journey from the simple cadence of village life to the cusp of something far greater was marked by moments of quiet revelation and deliberate choices, each one a step along the path toward a destiny that was already being woven into the fabric of Egyptian history. It was during these formative years that Neith's inner world began to mirror the complexity of the cosmos above. Her nights were spent not only in prayer and reflection but also in fervent study of the sacred texts that recounted the deeds of gods and heroes. In the flickering light of an oil lamp, she pored over ancient scrolls, deciphering the delicate hieroglyphs that danced across papyrus like living entities. Each symbol, each stroke of the scribe's brush, revealed to her layers of meaning and nuance, a language in which the wisdom of millennia was encoded. In these moments of intimate communion with the past, Neith's resolve was hardened. She vowed that one day, the lessons of her ancestors would be wielded not merely to preserve tradition, but to guide a future where wisdom and justice reigned supreme. The early years of her life were also a time of profound personal discovery. As she navigated the intricate social dynamics of her community, Neith became increasingly aware of the roles and expectations imposed upon women in a society that, while revering the feminine in the form of goddesses, still confined mortal women to a life of modesty and service. Yet, even within these constraints, she found subtle ways to assert her individuality and intellect, whether by engaging in spirited debates with the village elders or by offering innovative suggestions during community gatherings. She challenged conventional norms with a quiet dignity that resonated with all who encountered her. Her natural charisma and thoughtful demeanor earned her not only respect but also a reputation as someone who could be trusted to lead by example, a quality that would later prove indispensable in the turbulent world of royal courts. In time, the tapestry of Neith's early life became interwoven with the larger narrative of a civilization on the brink of transformation. The lessons of the past, learned at the knee of her mother and the wise priest of Thoth, merged seamlessly with her own observations of the world around her. As she listened to the distant echoes of royal decrees and the fervent chants of temple ceremonies carried on the wind, she realized that the fate of her people was bound to the choices made in the quiet moments of reflection and resolve. Every smile shared in the shade of a date palm, every tear shed during moments of communal grief, and every whispered prayer offered to the gods was a stitch in the vast tapestry of Egyptian destiny, a tapestry that she, even as a young woman, felt compelled to help weave. By the time Neith's childhood gave way to the threshold of adulthood, the foundation of her character had been firmly established. In the simple rhythms of rural life, she had discovered the immense power of knowledge, the transformative nature of compassion, and the indomitable spirit that could arise even in the face of relentless adversity. The girl who had once listened intently to the ancient hymns by the banks of the Nile had grown into a woman whose inner light shone with a quiet brilliance, a light that would one day illuminate the halls of power and redefine the course of history. Thus, in the gentle embrace of the Nile and the enduring whisper of the desert winds, the roots of Neith's destiny were firmly planted. Her early years, marked by a harmonious blend of tradition and individual inquiry, set the stage for the remarkable journey that lay ahead, a journey that would lead her from the quiet, sun-dappled lanes of her village to the towering corridors of the royal palace. where her wisdom and insight would become instrumental in shaping the fate of an empire. In retrospect, the humble origins of Neith stand as a testament to the timeless truth that greatness often sprouts from the simplest of beginnings. The lush fields, the cool shade of ancient trees, and the soft murmur of the Nile were not merely the backdrop of her childhood. They were the very essence of the wisdom that would guide her throughout her life. It was here, amid the interplay of light and shadow, hope and hardship, that the seeds of leadership were sown. Seeds that would eventually grow into a legacy as enduring as the monuments of stone and as fluid as the eternal river itself. In the quiet moments of reflection that followed the vibrant tapestry of her youth, Neith began to understand that her journey was not solely a personal odyssey but also a calling, a summons from the very heart of Egypt, the echoes of ancient wisdom, the reverberations of divine purpose, and the gentle guidance of those who had come before her converged to point toward a future where her talents would not be confined to the narrow boundaries of her village. Instead, they would flourish in the grand arena of a nation in transition, influencing the decisions of kings and reshaping the very structure of society. Even as the world beyond her village stirred with the currents of change, whispers of new dynasties rising and old powers waning, Neith carried with her the quiet assurance that the true strength of a civilization lay in its ability to nurture both tradition and transformation. Her early years had taught her that the wisdom of the past was not an anchor to hold one back, but a compass to guide one forward into uncharted territories. And so, with the resolute spirit of one who had been forged in the crucible of experience, she embraced the future with open arms, ready to infuse it with the light of knowledge and the warmth of compassion. As the days turned into seasons and the seasons into years, the legacy of Neith's early life became an integral part of the larger narrative of ancient Egypt, a narrative that would later be celebrated in songs, inscribed on temple walls, and passed down through countless generations. The modest village that had nurtured her had, in its own quiet way, given birth to a force of nature, a young woman whose mind and spirit would one day stand at the helm of an empire, guiding it through trials and triumphs with a wisdom that was as profound as it was enduring. And so, as the sun set over the endless desert and the stars began to reclaim the night sky, the story of Neith's early years remained etched into the heart of the land, a legacy of hope, resilience, and an unyielding belief in the power of the human spirit to shape destiny. In every ripple of the Nile, in every grain of golden sand, there lay the silent testimony of a girl who grew up to be a leader, a reminder that the roots of greatness are often hidden in the simplest of places, waiting only for the light of knowledge and the warmth of compassion to bring them forth into the brilliance of history. Thus, the early life of Neith, imbued with the sacred traditions of her people and nurtured by the timeless rhythms of nature, set the stage for the extraordinary journey that lay ahead, a journey that would carry her from the humble origins of a village life into the exalted halls of power, where her wisdom, strength, and empathy would forever alter the destiny of a nation. In the grand tapestry of ancient Egypt, where the majestic Nile carved a path through time and history, fate often wove together the lives of seemingly disparate souls. It was during one of the many shifting seasons, when the air was heavy with the promise of renewal and the fields blossomed under the gentle caress of the sun, that destiny prepared to bring Neith and Pepi II together in an encounter that would change the course of an empire. For Pepi II, the corridors of the royal palace were as much a crucible of duty as they were a stage for the unfolding drama of leadership, ascending the throne at an age when the world was still a playground of discovery. He was both a symbol of the old order and an emblem of a future yet unwritten. His early reign had been marked by both promise and the burdens of an almost unimaginable legacy, a legacy in which every decision bore the weight of generations. Surrounded by seasoned advisors, illustrious priests, and generals whose words held as much power as the edicts carved in stone, Pepi II's heart nonetheless harbored a longing for something beyond the rigid structures of statecraft, a genuine partnership that could guide him through the labyrinth of political intrigue and personal isolation. It was against this backdrop that word of Neith's reputation began to ripple through the palace halls. in a realm where alliances were forged by blood, tradition, and the favor of the gods. Her name carried with it an aura of quiet brilliance. Whispers of her wisdom and unassuming strength spread beyond the modest confines of her village origins and the hallowed chambers of her temple studies. It was said that her intellect rivaled that of the most revered scholars, and her empathy bridged the gap between the lofty ideals of divine decree and the harsh realities faced by the common people. To those who listened, she seemed less a consort waiting in the wings than a force of nature destined to influence the very fabric of Egyptian society. The stage for their fateful meeting was set during a grand festival, a celebration of the annual inundation of the Nile, when the fertile waters, long awaited and venerated, transformed the parched desert into a mosaic of life and abundance. The entire kingdom pulsed with life during this time. The air vibrated with the strains of sacred hymns, the clamor of excited voices in crowded marketplaces, and the perfumed aromas of incense and freshly harvested grain. Temples overflowed with pilgrims seeking divine favor, and the streets of Memphis and Thebes became living corridors of history, where every corner held the promise of miracles. Pepi II, amid the orchestrated splendor of this festival, moved through the throng with a measured grace, though the regal bearing of a pharaoh was ever present in his every gesture. His eyes betrayed a yearning for meaning beyond the gilded veneer of his throne. It was on one such day, a day when the sunlight seemed to glow with an almost celestial brilliance, that his path first crossed with that of Neith. Neith, arrayed in modest yet elegant garments that spoke of both her humble origins and her quietly refined sensibilities, had been invited to the palace as part of a delegation of scholars and spiritual leaders. Her presence was not dictated solely by her emerging renown, but also by the belief that the wisdom of the people's tradition could serve as a counterbalance to the sometimes volatile ambitions of the court. With her quiet confidence and the calm assurance of one who understood that power was a responsibility rather than a privilege, she entered the palace's ceremonial hall, a vast chamber adorned with towering columns, intricate hieroglyphs, and the soft, reverberating echoes of ancient chants. As the pharaoh's entourage made its way through the hall, their eyes met for the first time. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause, as though the gods had orchestrated this single, delicate instant to resonate through eternity. Pepi II's gaze fell upon Neith, and in that silent exchange, an ineffable recognition passed between them. It was not a declaration of immediate passion, but rather a mutual acknowledgement of kindred spirits, two souls poised at the crossroads of duty and destiny. The atmosphere in the hall shifted imperceptibly as the two came closer. Around them, the festival continued with vibrant energy. Dancers twirled in colorful patterns, musicians plucked the strings of their lyres, and the air vibrated with the collective heartbeat of a nation celebrating its perennial renewal. Yet, in that crowded space, Neith and Pepi II found themselves in a private world defined by unspoken understanding and shared aspirations. It was as if the din of the celebrations faded into a soft murmur, leaving behind the clear, ringing note of destiny that bound them together. Their initial conversation was both subtle and profound. As Pepi II extended a courteous greeting befitting his station, Neith replied with measured words that hinted at the depth of her intellect and the warmth of her spirit. In the exchange of pleasantries, there was an undercurrent of mutual respect, a recognition that each carried within them the weight of expectations and the desire to transcend them. The pharaoh, often encircled by sycophants and advisors whose praises were as repetitive as the recitations of ancient prayers, found in Neith an authenticity that was as refreshing as the cool waters of the Nile after a long, arid journey. It was not long before they were invited to a more private setting, a secluded alcove within the palace, where the strains of music and the glow of torches softened the rigid outlines of imperial formality. Here, away from the prying eyes of courtiers and the relentless obligations of state protocol, the true nature of their dialogue began to emerge. Pepi II, with the cautious frankness that marked a leader striving to reconcile his personal vulnerabilities with the demands of kingship, spoke of the challenges that burdened him, the isolation of power, the loneliness of a throne that demanded both strength and sacrifice, and the persistent struggle to find wisdom amid the clamor of ambition. Neith listened intently, her eyes reflecting a blend of empathy and resolve. She spoke not as a subordinate or a distant oracle, but as an equal, a woman who had witnessed the hardships of everyday life and who had learned that true leadership was born from an understanding of the human condition. With each word, she offered not only counsel but a vision of a kingdom where the voices of its people were heard and their hardships alleviated through policies born of compassion and common sense. Her language was imbued with the gentle cadence of a storyteller and the precision of a scholar, weaving together the threads of ancient wisdom and pragmatic governance. The conversation that unfolded in that alcove was a turning point, a subtle yet seismic shift in the dynamics of the royal court. In Neith's articulate reflections on justice, empathy, and the proper stewardship of power, Pepi II found a mirror for his own innermost yearnings. He saw in her not just a learned advisor, but a kindred spirit who understood that the true measure of a ruler's greatness lay not in the longevity of his reign or the might of his armies, but in the benevolence of his actions and the transformative impact of his policies on the lives of his subjects. Their dialogue meandered through topics both esoteric and immediate: the role of the gods in the everyday affairs of mortals, the importance of preserving ancient traditions while embracing necessary change, and the ways in which a ruler's legacy could be secured not solely through monuments of stone, but through the lasting benefits reaped by his people. In that secluded space, shielded from the formalities of court, the initial seeds of a remarkable alliance were sown. There was no overt declaration of romance or political maneuvering, only the gentle, deliberate exchange of ideas that promised to reshape the destiny of Egypt. For Pepi II, the encounter with Neith was like the sudden appearance of a guiding star amid the vast, dark expanse of the royal night, a beacon that illuminated the path forward when all seemed shrouded in uncertainty. For Neith, it was an opportunity to step from the periphery of scholarly respectability into the heart of national governance, where her insights could be transformed into policies that might one day alleviate the suffering of the common people. Outside the privacy of their conversation, the palace continued to hum with the vibrant energy of the festival. Yet, for those few minutes, the grandeur of the event seemed to pale in comparison to the magnitude of the ideas being exchanged. Neith's calm assurance and Pepi II's earnest vulnerability created an atmosphere of trust, a delicate space in which the rigid hierarchies of power could be softened by mutual understanding and a shared vision for a better future. In the days that followed, the memory of that fateful encounter began to ripple through the palace corridors. Advisors who had long operated under the assumption that the pharaoh's decisions were guided solely by tradition and the counsel of his long-established inner circle found themselves reconsidering the value of a fresh perspective. There were murmurs among the courtiers, quiet acknowledgments that a new force was emerging within the palace, one that might steer the course of the kingdom toward a more enlightened future. And while many remained skeptical of the transformative potential of such an alliance, none could deny that something had shifted in the heart of the royal court. Pepi II, influenced by that pivotal conversation, began to seek out Neith's counsel on matters that ranged from state finance to the welfare of the populace. He invited her to join his inner circle of advisors, a move that was met with both intrigue and apprehension by those who had long guarded the traditions of power. Yet, time and again, the pharaoh found that her insights carried a practical wisdom that bridged the lofty ideals of the divine with the gritty realities of governance. Her proposals were measured, thoughtful, and steeped in the traditions of ancient Egyptian thought. Yet they also possessed an innovative spirit that promised to rejuvenate the structures of power in a kingdom long accustomed to the static rhythms of ritual. For her part, Neith embraced her new role not as a subordinate or a mere ornament to the pharaoh's court, but as an active participant in the shaping of national destiny. She organized discreet meetings with scholars, farmers, and even representatives of the artisan guilds, seeking to understand the concerns of the people at every level. These endeavors were not public spectacles designed for the benefit of posterity, but rather quiet, earnest efforts to gather insights that might one day inform policies with a genuine heart for reform. In her interactions, she balanced the wisdom of tradition with a keen awareness of modern necessities, laying the groundwork for a state that was both respectful of its heritage and responsive to the evolving needs of its citizens. As the festival drew to a close and the echoes of celebration faded into the cool, quiet nights of the palace, the alliance between Neith and Pepi II grew ever more profound. Their initial encounter, marked by subtle glances and hushed conversations, had blossomed into a partnership defined by mutual respect, shared ambition, and a deep-seated belief in the transformative power of wisdom. The Pharaoh's eyes, once clouded by the isolation of absolute power, now shone with a tempered light, a light that reflected both the burdens of leadership and the hope inspired by Neith's unwavering vision. In the days that followed, as the kingdom continued its eternal dance between the cycles of the Nile and the timeless march of history, the encounter between Neith and Pepi II became a symbol of possibility. In the quiet recesses of the palace, their conversations laid the intellectual and moral foundation for reforms that would ripple outward, touching the lives of ordinary Egyptians, rejuvenating the cultural vibrancy of the land, and redefining what it meant to rule with compassion and foresight. Thus, the fateful meeting of these two remarkable souls, each marked by their own unique strengths, challenges, and dreams, set in motion a series of events that would ultimately reshape the destiny of an entire civilization. It was a union not forged by the dramatic clash of armies or the sudden upheaval of dynastic ambition, but by the deliberate, patient interplay of ideas and ideals, a royal union in which the wisdom of one woman became the secret strength behind the enduring legacy of a pharaoh. As the palace continued to echo with the soft cadence of whispered plans and visionary aspirations, the legacy of that day endured as a reminder that the course of history is often determined not by the grandiose gestures of power, but by the quiet, steadfast resolve of those who dare to imagine a better future. In the gentle interplay of destiny and determination, Neith and Pepi II had begun to shape a new chapter in the annals of Egypt, one where the meeting of two hearts and minds would pave the way for reforms that honored the past, embraced the present, and lit the way for generations to come. And so, beneath the ever-watchful eyes of the gods, amid the timeless splendor of ancient monuments and the enduring flow of the Nile, the fateful encounter of Neith and Pepi II took root, a seed of hope planted in the fertile soil of possibility, destined to blossom into a legacy that would echo through the corridors of time. The palace corridors, once echoing with the measured footsteps of tradition, had gradually come to reflect the stirring pulse of change, a change heralded by the quiet yet profound presence of Neith. In the years following her fateful encounter with Pepi II, the queen's influence began to weave itself into the fabric of statecraft, an influence that would forever alter the destiny of a nation. Even as the gilded halls of the royal palace retained the ancient rituals and hieroglyphs of centuries past, a subtle revolution was unfolding beneath their marble arches, a revolution born not of swords or thunderous decrees but of ideas and gentle counsel. Neith's early days in the palace were marked by a careful navigation of courtly traditions, with a background steeped in the mysticism and practical wisdom of her humble origins. She was initially regarded by the conservative courtiers as an outsider, an unassuming woman whose knowledge of temple lore and rural wisdom set her apart from the rigid hierarchies that had long defined the court. Yet as the days turned into months, and the months into years, the true measure of her influence became apparent. It was not in overt declarations or public ceremonies, but in the quiet moments when the pharaoh, burdened by the weight of a nearly century-long reign, would pause in private reflection and seek her counsel. In the dim light of the palace's private council chamber, walls adorned with inscriptions of divine favor and scenes of mythic battles, the once unspoken partnership between Pepi II and Neith began to crystallize into a genuine alliance. Here, away from the prying eyes of scheming courtiers and the ever-watchful priests, the queen shared with the young pharaoh her ideas of governance that balanced the revered traditions of old with a fresh, forward-looking pragmatism. Her words, chosen with the care of one who had grown up listening to the hushed recitations of ancient hymns along the banks of the Nile, resonated with an authority that came from both personal experience and a deep understanding of the human condition. Pepi II, who had borne the mantle of kingship since childhood, found in Neith a counterpoint to the isolation that had so long defined his reign. While the weight of the crown had often rendered him silent and cautious, her gentle yet persuasive presence sparked in him an openness to consider reforms that might ease the burdens of his people. Their conversations, measured, intimate dialogues held in the quiet hours of early morning or late at night, became a crucible for new ideas. Together, they examined the records of past pharaohs, the edicts inscribed in stone, and the oral traditions that spoke of the god's will. In these discussions, Neith proposed that the true legacy of a ruler was not merely in monuments and triumphs on the battlefield, but in the everyday welfare of the citizens whose lives depended on the benevolence and foresight of their leaders. The queen's influence soon spread beyond the private council of the pharaoh. In an era where the administrative machinery of the state was as much an inheritance of ancient custom as it was a system in need of renewal, Neith began to subtly reshape the inner workings of the palace. She took a personal interest in the education of young scribes and the training of officials who would one day become the backbone of the royal bureaucracy. Under her guidance, select members of the court were encouraged to study not only the sacred texts of the gods but also the practical arts of accounting, agriculture, and diplomacy in the gentle hum of the palace library, where scrolls and papyri chronicled the history of Egypt. Neith's voice emerged as one that bridged the ancient with the modern. Her insistence on a more holistic education, one that valued empathy alongside expertise, challenged the entrenched belief that the sole purpose of a royal official was to preserve tradition at all costs. One of the most significant arenas in which Neith's early influence was felt was in the realm of religious reform. In a society where the divine was inextricably linked with the fate of the state, the palace priesthood had long wielded considerable power. Temples dedicated to deities such as Osiris and Isis were not only centers of worship but also institutions that reinforced the status quo. Yet Neith, whose own name evoked the ancient goddess of war and weaving, believed that a true understanding of the divine required a dynamic interplay between tradition and innovation. She urged Pepi II to consider reforms that would democratize religious practice, making the favor of the gods accessible to not only the elite but also the common people who toiled in the fields and markets of Egypt. Her proposals were not radical in the sense of rejecting the old beliefs, but rather in expanding their scope. Neith argued that the gods' blessings should be seen as a universal gift, one that required the active participation of every citizen. She advocated for festivals that celebrated local deities alongside the state pantheon, and for rituals that emphasized communal involvement rather than the isolation of sacred rites reserved for the priestly caste. In doing so, she sought to harness the unifying power of religious observance to foster a stronger sense of national identity and shared destiny, a goal that resonated deeply with a pharaoh who longed for a legacy defined by the welfare of his people. As Neith's ideas took root, her role in the palace began to evolve from that of a mere advisor to that of a true partner in governance. The inner circle of Pepi II, once dominated by conservative voices steeped in centuries-old practices, gradually opened up to the possibility of change. Although many courtiers regarded her with suspicion at first, citing her rural origins and unorthodox methods, the tangible benefits of her counsel could not be denied. Improvements in agricultural practices, adjustments in taxation that favored small farmers, and even subtle shifts in the way justice was administered all bore the unmistakable imprint of Neith's influence. Her reforms were carefully measured, ensuring that the ancient customs were not discarded overnight but rather adapted to meet the evolving needs of a people in transition. In the vibrant markets and along the banks of the Nile, whispers of these changes began to spread. Farmers found that new irrigation techniques, inspired by ideas discussed in the quiet halls of the palace, led to more reliable harvests, Artisans reported that a more equitable system of taxation had allowed them to invest in better tools and training, fostering a renaissance in local crafts and trade. Even the temple priests, initially wary of any alteration to the sacred order, gradually recognized that a more inclusive approach to religious practice had the potential to bring their communities closer together. For many Egyptians, the soft revolution heralded by Neith's early influence was not a threat to their traditions but a revitalization, a promise that the legacy of their ancestors could be carried forward with renewed vigor and compassion. Yet, the transformation was not without its challenges. The entrenched power structures of the palace were resistant to change, and there were moments when Neith's proposals met with heated debate and even outright hostility from those who feared that altering the ancient order might invite chaos. In the hushed corners of the palace, where shadows lengthened under the weight of millennia-old statues and carvings, there were whispered plots to undermine her influence. Senior advisors and conservative priests, whose authority had long been unquestioned, found themselves confronted by a woman whose intellect and resolve defied conventional expectations. They questioned her right to speak on matters of state and faith, arguing that the wisdom of the past was immutable and that any deviation from established practices risked upsetting the delicate balance that had sustained Egypt for generations. But Neith, drawing strength from the very traditions she sought to honor, met these challenges with a calm determination that gradually won over even the most skeptical minds. In private audiences with the Pharaoh, she would patiently explain that the purpose of reform was not to discard the old ways but to build upon them, a process of evolution rather than revolution. Her arguments were imbued with the same measured cadence that had defined the oral traditions of her childhood, and her appeal was as much to the heart as it was to the intellect. Slowly, the critics began to see that her vision was not one of reckless abandonment but of a thoughtful reimagining of governance, a means to ensure that the blessings of the gods could be shared by all, not just a privileged few. It was during one particularly tense council meeting, a gathering marked by the low murmur of dissent and the tension of ancient rivalries, that Neith's influence was most strikingly revealed. The issue at hand was a proposal to raise taxes on the peasantry to fund an ambitious military campaign against a neighboring kingdom. Many of the elder advisors argued that such a measure was necessary to secure Egypt's borders and maintain its long-standing traditions of military might. However, Neith, drawing upon both her scholarly background and her intimate knowledge of the hardships faced by ordinary Egyptians, challenged the proposal with a measured but impassioned plea for compassion. Standing before the assembled council, she recounted the stories of families who had already suffered from the unpredictable whims of the Nile, tales of drought and flood, of harvests lost to the shifting sands, and of communities strained to the breaking point. With a clarity that cut through the formal rhetoric of her detractors, she argued that the true strength of Egypt lay not in the might of its armies but in the unity and resilience of its people. A ruler, she said softly yet firmly, must be as much a guardian of his people's hearts as he is the master of his armies. To burden the common citizen with the weight of war is to risk shattering the very foundation upon which our civilization rests. Her words, echoing in the silence that followed, left an indelible mark on all who heard them, including the Pharaoh himself, who recognized in her counsel a rare blend of compassion and wisdom. In the days and weeks that followed, as the council continued to debate the merits of fiscal austerity versus the need for military preparedness, Neith's position began to solidify. Gradually, more voices in the room joined her in calling for alternative measures, initiatives aimed at bolstering the economy through agricultural innovation, trade, and the equitable distribution of resources. Even those who had once been her staunchest opponents found themselves swayed by the undeniable logic of her arguments. It was not long before Pepi II, in a rare moment of public decisiveness, sided with Neith's proposals. The decision, though met with murmurs of dissent from the traditionalist faction, was hailed by many as a bold step towards a more inclusive and sustainable future for Egypt. Beyond the realm of fiscal policy and military strategy, Neith's influence extended into the cultural and social life of the palace, recognizing that the arts and intellectual pursuits were the lifeblood of a vibrant society. She fostered an environment in which scholars, poets, and artists were encouraged to engage in open discourse. Private salons were organized in the quieter quarters of the palace, where the exchange of ideas flowed as freely as the sacred waters of the Nile. These gatherings, attended by a diverse array of individuals, from seasoned temple scribes to young men and women of modest backgrounds, became a melting pot of creativity and reflection. In these intimate settings, the rigid boundaries that had long separated the elite from the common people began to blur, and the spirit of renewal that Neith championed took on a distinctly human form. It was in these moments of cultural reawakening that the true measure of Neith's early influence became apparent. Through her gentle guidance, the palace transformed from a bastion of immovable tradition into a dynamic arena of innovation and shared purpose. Her insistence on the value of empathy in governance resonated not only in the policies that were enacted, but in the very way that the court began to function as a community, one where the voices of even the humblest citizens found echoes in the decisions made by those in power. As the years passed and the reforms initiated under her guidance began to bear fruit, the legacy of Neith's early influence grew ever more pronounced. The pharaoh's once isolated reign was now marked by moments of genuine connection with his subjects, a recognition that the true art of rulership was in balancing strength with kindness, authority with understanding. In the cool twilight of the palace, where the fading light revealed intricate carvings that told stories of gods and men, Neith and Pepi II would often walk together, their conversation drifting from matters of state to reflections on the human spirit. In these quiet walks, the boundaries of rank and station melted away, leaving only the shared hope of a brighter future. For the people of Egypt, the impact of these changes was profound. In villages along the Nile, where the lives of farmers and laborers had long been at the mercy of both nature and capricious rulers, there came a new era of stability and promise. Improved agricultural techniques, better resource management, and a more compassionate tax system meant that families could dream of a future unburdened by the constant fear of famine or oppression. In the temples, where priests had once been the sole custodians of divine knowledge, there was now an increased emphasis on communal participation, a move that democratized the sacred and made the gods' blessings a shared inheritance rather than an exclusive privilege. Yet, the path of transformation was not without its moments of trial and tribulation. There were periods when the conservative forces within the palace regrouped and plotted to reassert the old order. Secret meetings in shadowed recesses and hushed exchanges in the corridors of power sometimes threatened to undo the careful progress that had been made. In these times, Neith's calm determination shone even more brightly, with an unwavering belief in the potential for progress. She navigated these challenges with the same measured grace that had characterized her every action, drawing on the lessons of her childhood, of resilience in the face of hardship and the enduring power of compassion. She met each obstacle as an opportunity to reaffirm her vision for Egypt. In one such crisis, when a faction of the court attempted to block a series of reforms designed to improve the distribution of grain during a particularly harsh season, Neith found herself at the center of a political storm. The dissenters argued that any change to the traditional channels of power would invite chaos and endanger the kingdom's delicate equilibrium. With the pharaoh's support wavering under the pressure of entrenched interests, the future of the reforms hung in the balance. In a series of impassioned appeals before the royal council, Neith laid bare the human cost of inaction. Her words painted a vivid picture of suffering and hope, the plight of the starving peasant, the determination of a mother to feed her children, and the promise of a society in which the strength of its rulers was measured by their willingness to uplift even the most vulnerable. Moved by her argument and by the clarity of her vision, the pharaoh ultimately rallied behind her proposals, and the reforms were enacted. This decisive moment not only strengthened the alliance between Neith and Pepi II, but also marked a turning point in the history of the kingdom, a moment when the ancient machinery of power began to move with a new rhythm, one that resonated with the heartbeat of its people. Over time, the legacy of Neith's early influence became interwoven with the very identity of the state. The corridors of the palace, once a stage for the unchallenged rituals of old, now echoed with debates about the future, a future in which the welfare of every Egyptian was given its due place in the annals of history. In the quiet strength of her counsel, in the steadfast support she provided to the young pharaoh, and in the subtle transformations she initiated in every facet of governance, Neith had laid the foundation for a legacy that would endure long after her time. Thus, as the sun set on another day in ancient Egypt, casting long shadows over the timeless monuments and the gentle flow of the Nile, the spirit of reform and renewal that Neith had ignited continued to shine. Her influence, though at times challenged and contested, had transformed the palace from a relic of unyielding tradition into a vibrant center of innovation and shared purpose. In the pharaoh's shadow, a place once defined solely by isolation and the weight of ancient duty, a new light had emerged, one that embraced the promise of compassion, justice, and the transformative power of wisdom. In the fullness of time, as the reforms took hold and the people of Egypt began to experience the benefits of a more responsive and humane governance, the name of Neith became synonymous not merely with the legacy of a queen, but with the very hope of a renewed civilization. Her journey from the quiet village along the Nile to the exalted halls of power was celebrated in songs, inscribed on temple walls, and passed down through generations as a reminder that true leadership is measured not by the longevity of one's reign, but by the enduring impact of one's compassion and vision. And so, in the annals of Egypt's storied past, the period when Neith rose in the pharaoh's shadow remains an enduring testament to the power of subtle influence, a time when a quiet voice challenged the ancient order and ushered in a new era of understanding and progress. It is a legacy that continues to inspire, reminding us that even in the most rigid of systems, the seeds of transformation can take root when nurtured by wisdom, courage, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow. As dusk deepened and the stars emerged one by one above the silent desert, the palace and its inhabitants rested with the knowledge that a great change was underway, a change that would be remembered not for its dramatic upheavals, but for its gentle, persistent insistence that every life mattered. In that enduring twilight, the legacy of Neith's early influence glowed like a beacon, a reminder that even in the shadow of absolute power, the human spirit can shine with a brilliance that transforms nations. Thus ends this chapter of a journey that, though filled with challenges and opposition, stands as a celebration of the quiet revolution sparked by one remarkable woman. Her early influence, manifest in policies that enriched the lives of her people, in reforms that revived ancient traditions with new purpose, and in the enduring partnership she forged with Pepi II, forever altered the course of a civilization and left an indelible mark on the heart of Egypt. The story of Neith in the pharaoh's shadow is a timeless reminder that true power is not found solely in crowns and conquests, but in the enduring capacity for empathy, wisdom, and the courage to imagine a better future. In the heart of ancient Egypt, as the Nile continued its eternal flow and the monuments of the past bore silent witness to the passage of time, the consolidation of power under Pepi II's reign and Neith's influence took on new dimensions. This was an era when the delicate balance between tradition and innovation was challenged by both internal dissension and external threats. In these tumultuous times, the palace corridors, once arenas of scholarly debates and quiet reforms, became battlegrounds for competing visions of Egypt's future. It was in this charged atmosphere that Neith's steady guidance and unwavering resolve shone brightest, proving indispensable as the kingdom braced itself against political turbulence. The seeds of discontent had long been sown in the fertile yet volatile soil of the royal court, while the reforms initiated under Neith's counsel had begun to improve the lives of common citizens, ushering in better agricultural practices, fairer taxation, and more inclusive religious rituals. Such progress inevitably ruffled the feathers of those steeped in the ancient ways. The conservative factions within the court, accustomed to the predictable rhythms of age-old customs, viewed these changes as threats to their long-standing authority. In the shadowed meeting rooms of the palace, behind closed doors and secret passageways, whispers grew into murmurs of resistance, prominent advisors, who had once commanded respect solely on the basis of their lineage and adherence to tradition, now found themselves at odds with a new order that prioritized empathy and innovation over ritualistic adherence. Amid this internal strife, the external landscape of power was shifting as well. Rival kingdoms eyed Egypt's riches with covetous interest, and border skirmishes, once rare in the relative peace fostered by divine sanction, began to increase in frequency. The neighboring lands, stirred by their own internal ambitions and external pressures, launched provocative raids into the outskirts of Egypt, testing the kingdom's resolve and threatening to destabilize the fragile unity that the reforms had fostered. It was in this crucible of political and military uncertainty that the true test of leadership was about to unfold. Pepi II, now more mature yet still burdened by the heavy legacy of a nearly century-long reign, found himself confronted by challenges that transcended the realm of statecraft. His eyes, once softened by the gentle counsel of Neith, now reflected the harsh realities of war and dissent, even as he recognized the merit of the reforms that had begun to transform his kingdom. He was painfully aware of the simmering unrest within the corridors of his own palace. The very advisors who had once echoed his orders now questioned his decisions, and the loyalty of the court was splintering into factions that eyed each other with suspicion and veiled hostility. In these dark moments, Neith emerged as a beacon of clarity and fortitude, having weathered the early storms of reform and survived the intrigues of conservative adversaries. She now stood at the forefront of the struggle to consolidate power and maintain the integrity of Egypt's future, with her deep-rooted belief that true strength was born of unity and compassion. She dedicated herself to bridging the divides that threatened to shatter the kingdom. Her approach was not one of brute force or radical upheaval. Instead, it was characterized by a patient, methodical recalibration of policies and allegiances, one that sought to bring even the most recalcitrant elements into the fold of progress. It began with a series of quiet meetings held in the lesser-known wings of the palace. Away from the glare of public scrutiny, Neith invited influential courtiers, even those initially opposed to her reforms, to join her in candid discussions about the future of Egypt. In these intimate gatherings, the atmosphere was not one of confrontation but of genuine dialogue. Under the flickering light of oil lamps, with the cool stone of ancient corridors echoing the voices of generations past, she listened intently to the concerns of each participant. Some spoke of the sanctity of traditions that had sustained Egypt for millennia, while others confessed their fears that rapid change might undo the careful tapestry of rituals and customs that defined their identity. Neith acknowledged these concerns, validating the wisdom of the old while gently introducing the need for adaptation in a world that was no longer static. One such evening, in a secluded chamber adorned with relics of forgotten dynasties, an elder statesman, a man whose family had served as advisors for countless generations, voiced a sentiment that had long festered in the hearts of many. Our traditions are the backbone of this land. To alter them is to risk the very soul of Egypt. Neith, her gaze calm yet resolute, responded in a tone that carried both empathy and conviction. Our traditions, like the mighty Nile, are indeed powerful, yet even the Nile changes its course over time, nourishing new lands and bringing forth unexpected life. It is not a betrayal of the past to allow the future to take shape. It is a testament to our ability to evolve while remaining true to our core values. Her words, measured and poetic, resonated deeply with those present. Slowly, skepticism gave way to a cautious optimism, a recognition that change, when guided by wisdom and compassion, need not be a harbinger of chaos. As internal debates raged within the palace, the external pressures on Egypt intensified. News arrived of incursions along the eastern border, skirmishes that threatened to spill over into full-blown conflict. The neighboring kingdom, emboldened by its own internal strife and led by a charismatic but volatile ruler, launched a series of surprise attacks designed to test Egypt's defenses. The royal court was thrown into turmoil as military strategists and generals debated the appropriate response. Should the kingdom retaliate with overwhelming force to reassert its dominance? Or should it pursue diplomatic channels to defuse the rising tensions? In the midst of this uncertainty, Neith again stepped forward, this time to mediate between the clashing factions. Recognizing that military might alone would not secure the future of Egypt, she advocated for a balanced approach, one that combined measured defensive strategies with proactive diplomacy. In a series of councils convened under the watchful eyes of the gods, she proposed the creation of a specialized advisory group composed of military experts, diplomats, and scholars. Their charge was simple yet profound: to develop a comprehensive plan that would protect the kingdom's borders without sacrificing the humane and compassionate governance that had become the hallmark of Pepi II's reign. The formation of this advisory group, spearheaded by Neith's initiative, marked a turning point in the consolidation of power. It was a bold experiment, a melding of the ancient and the modern, the pragmatic and the idealistic. Meetings were held in a grand hall lined with statues of revered deities, where maps of the known world were spread out on massive stone tables. Neith, ever the patient mediator, guided discussions with a steady hand. She encouraged military leaders to share their tactical insights, while equally inviting diplomats to recount their experiences in negotiating peace under dire circumstances. Scholars contributed their understanding of historical precedents, drawing on the lessons of past empires that had risen and fallen. In this crucible of collective wisdom, a strategy began to emerge, one that balanced the need for immediate action with the longer-term goal of establishing enduring peace. Yet, not everyone was willing to embrace this conciliatory approach. Hardliners within the military, fueled by pride and the desire for retribution, argued for a swift and ruthless response to the incursions. Their voices, raised in passionate dissent, filled the corridors of power with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. In a particularly charged meeting, a general with scars from past battles bellowed, "We cannot sit idly by while our enemies test our resolve. Egypt must strike hard and show no mercy, lest our strength be seen as weakness." The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment, it seemed as though the carefully balanced strategy might collapse under the weight of raw aggression. It was at that critical juncture that Neith, with the poise and authority that had come to define her, rose to address the assembly. Standing before the gathered military leaders, diplomats, and courtiers, she spoke not with the thunder of war, but with the quiet force of conviction. Violence, though sometimes necessary, is a tool that must be wielded with the utmost caution. She began, her voice carrying across the silent hall. Our true strength lies not in the destruction of our foes, but in our capacity to protect and nurture our own people. If we let anger and the desire for revenge dictate our actions, we risk plunging our great nation into an endless cycle of strife, a cycle from which there is no escape. Let us instead show our enemies that Egypt is a land of resilience and wisdom, where the power of reason and the strength of unity prevail over the impulsiveness of retribution. Her words, delivered with heartfelt sincerity, softened even the most hardened hearts in the room. Slowly, the fervor of the hardliners subsided, replaced by a cautious agreement that a balanced approach was not only preferable but necessary for the survival of the nation. In the months that followed, the advisory group worked tirelessly to implement the dual strategy. Neith traveled extensively throughout Egypt, meeting with local leaders, merchants, and even representatives of nomadic tribes whose loyalty had long been uncertain. Her goal was to forge a network of alliances and partnerships that could serve as the backbone of Egypt's defense, an informal but robust coalition that would ensure rapid communication and mutual support in times of crisis. In remote villages along the banks of the Nile, her presence was met with both awe and relief. To the common people, who had long felt neglected by the distant machinery of state, Neith's hands-on approach was a sign that their voices were finally being heard. She listened to their grievances, learned of their hardships, and promised that their struggles would not be in vain. In the eyes of the peasants and artisans, She became not just an advisor to the pharaoh, but a guardian of their hopes and dreams. Diplomatic channels, too, were strengthened under her watchful guidance. Ambassadors were dispatched to neighboring kingdoms with clear messages of peace and mutual respect, even as Egypt maintained a readiness to defend its sovereignty. Neith's own charisma and reputation as a wise mediator opened doors that had long been closed by mistrust and old rivalries. In secret meetings held along the borderlands and in neutral territories, she engaged in delicate negotiations that would eventually lead to a series of treaties designed to stabilize the region. These agreements, though fragile at first, laid the groundwork for a period of relative calm, a reprieve that allowed Egypt to consolidate its internal reforms and prepare for the future. As Egypt navigated this turbulent period, the dual challenges of internal dissent and external aggression gradually began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism. The reforms initiated by Neith had not only modernized the administrative apparatus of the kingdom, but had also reawakened a sense of national unity that had long been dormant. Even the traditionalists, though still wary of change, could not ignore the tangible benefits that the new policies had brought to the everyday lives of Egyptians. Improved irrigation systems had led to richer harvests. Fairer taxation had spurred economic activity, and a more inclusive approach to religious practice had rekindled the communal spirit in temples and marketplaces alike. Throughout these transformative years, Neith remained a steadfast presence, a guiding light amid the storm of political turbulence. In quiet moments, when the weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon her shoulders, she would retreat to the palace gardens. There, under the ancient canopy of date palms and in the gentle rustle of papyrus leaves, she found solace in reflection and prayer. It was in these moments of solitude that she drew strength from the timeless rhythms of the Nile and the enduring wisdom of the past. And each time she emerged, it was with renewed determination to continue steering her beloved Egypt through the uncertainties of the age. The consolidation of power was not an overnight miracle but a gradual process, a tapestry woven from countless threads of dialogue, compromise, and visionary leadership. Neith's influence, once seen as a mere counterbalance to the might of the pharaoh, had grown into a cornerstone of Egypt's governance. Her ability to bridge the gap between ancient tradition and the demands of a modern state had transformed the political landscape, ensuring that the kingdom would not merely survive the storms of discontent but emerge stronger and more resilient. In the grand chronicles of Egypt's storied past, the era of consolidation stands out as a time when the forces of change and continuity clashed and ultimately found harmony. It was a period marked by fierce debates in the halls of power, decisive actions on distant battlefields, and quiet acts of courage in the lives of ordinary citizens. And at the center of it all was Neith, a woman of remarkable intellect, compassion, and resolve, whose unwavering belief in the possibility of a better future reshaped the destiny of a nation. As the years passed and the tumult of political strife slowly gave way to a renewed sense of order and unity, Egypt began to look toward the future with hope. The reforms that had once been met with skepticism and resistance were now celebrated as the foundation of a more just and prosperous society. And though the challenges of governance would always remain, the legacy of this transformative period, nurtured by the steady hand of Neith and the enlightened rule of Pepi II, ensured that the spirit of progress would continue to guide the kingdom through whatever storms lay ahead. In the end, the story of this era was not one of conquest or dominance, but of transformation, a testament to the enduring power of ideas, compassion, and the steadfast courage to navigate the turbulent waters of change. Neith's leadership during these trying times became a beacon for future generations, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the gentle force of wisdom and empathy could prevail over the most entrenched of traditions. Thus, as the sun set on another long day in the eternal land of Egypt, its golden light bathing the ancient temples and monuments in a warm, timeless glow, the consolidated power of the kingdom stood as a living legacy to the vision and perseverance of those who dared to dream of a better tomorrow. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, amid the hushed reverence of a people united in hope, the spirit of reform and renewal remained unbroken. a testament to a time when a queen's steady influence transformed political turbulence into a lasting legacy of peace, unity, and progress. In the midst of a kingdom undergoing profound transformation, Neith's influence extended far beyond the corridors of power and the debates of statecraft. As the reforms she championed reshaped Egypt's institutions and renewed the spirit of its people. Another, more intimate legacy was quietly taking root, the legacy of motherhood and mentorship. In a world where the future of a civilization rested as much on the wisdom imparted to its next generation as on the triumphs of its current rulers, Neith embraced her role as both mother and mentor with an unwavering sense of purpose and love. Within the hushed, sunlit courtyards of the palace, where ancient stone and delicate papyrus bore witness to the passage of time, Neith's private life unfolded in tandem with her public endeavors. Her children, born into a world of both great privilege and profound responsibility, were the living embodiment of her hopes for a more enlightened Egypt. From their earliest days, she instilled in them the values that had guided her own journey: a deep reverence for the wisdom of the past, a compassionate commitment to the welfare of the people, and an unyielding belief in the power of knowledge to bridge the chasms of tradition and innovation. Neith's approach to motherhood was as deliberate and thoughtful as her political counsel. She understood that while the palace might be the stage upon which the drama of state unfolded, it was in the quiet moments of familial intimacy that the true foundations of character were built. In the soft glow of dawn, before the bustling rhythms of palace life resumed their relentless pace, Neith would gather her children in a secluded garden where the air was perfumed with the scent of blooming lotus and the gentle murmur of the Nile could be heard in the distance. There, beneath the graceful arc of ancient date palms, she would share with them stories of the gods and heroes, tales passed down through generations that carried not only the weight of myth but also the lessons of history. Her words, spoken in a tone both gentle and firm, were not mere recitations of lore but deliberate meditations on the virtues of courage, empathy, and wisdom. She taught her children that true greatness was not measured solely by the might of armies or the splendor of monuments, but by the capacity to uplift others, to learn continuously, and to adapt with grace to the shifting sands of fate. As they listened, wide-eyed and eager, the children absorbed not only the tales of ancient valor but also the subtle nuances of leadership and the moral imperatives that would one day guide their own paths. In those moments, Neith's role as a mother transcended the personal. It became a vital act of nation-building, a nurturing of the very soul of Egypt, balancing her duties as a devoted mother with the immense responsibilities of state. Neith became a living exemplar of the harmony that could exist between the personal and the public. Even as she navigated the treacherous waters of political turbulence and steered the kingdom through crises of faith and warfare, she never allowed the demands of governance to eclipse the sacred space reserved for her family. In the quiet intervals between high-stakes councils and arduous negotiations, she made time to sit with her children, to listen to their dreams and concerns, and to offer guidance that was as practical as it was nurturing. Whether she was explaining the intricacies of managing an estate or recounting the gentle lessons of the natural world, the way the Nile could transform barren land into lush fields, Neith's teachings were imbued with the same sincerity and clarity that had earned her the admiration of both the common folk and the highest echelons of power. As the years passed and her children grew, Neith's mentorship took on an even broader significance. Recognizing that the challenges facing Egypt were not confined solely to the realm of governance, she expanded her nurturing influence to include the broader community. In a series of carefully orchestrated gatherings, she invited not only her own progeny but also the children of trusted officials, promising that the future of the nation depended on the education and empowerment of its young. In these sessions, held in a spacious hall adorned with carvings of the gods and illuminated by the soft flicker of oil lamps, Neith encouraged a free exchange of ideas. She fostered an environment where questions were celebrated and curiosity was seen as the precursor to wisdom. The discussions in these gatherings ranged from the practical to the philosophical, Neith explained the delicate interplay between the rhythms of the natural world and the cycles of human endeavor, how the inundation of the Nile, so critical to the survival of Egypt, mirrored the ebb and flow of fortune in human affairs. She spoke of the responsibility that came with power, urging the young minds to always consider the welfare of their fellow citizens, and to lead with a heart as open as the vast desert sky. In her eyes, each child represented the promise of a new chapter in Egypt's storied narrative, a narrative that could be enriched by the infusion of fresh ideas and the passionate commitment to justice and compassion. For Neith, the act of nurturing was as much about listening as it was about teaching. She was known to be a patient confidant, welcoming the concerns and aspirations of her children with an empathetic ear and wise counsel. There were evenings, after the formalities of the day had receded into a quiet calm, when she would sit with her eldest child by the banks of a small palace fountain. In the soft murmur of the water and the distant chorus of night creatures, they would converse about the challenges of leadership and the burdens of responsibility. Neith would share with them her own experiences, the moments of triumph, the episodes of doubt, and the lessons learned from both. In these intimate exchanges, the boundaries between teacher and learner blurred, forging a bond of trust that would shape the character of her children and, by extension, the future of the kingdom. As her children matured into young adults, they began to step into roles of increasing responsibility within the administrative and cultural life of Egypt. Some were groomed to serve as scribes and advisors in the royal court, while others ventured into the fields of diplomacy and trade, carrying with them the principles their mother had instilled in them. In every sphere, the influence of Neith was evident, not as a distant memory, but as a living, dynamic force that guided their decisions and actions. Her approach to mentorship was not confined to formal instruction. It was woven into the fabric of everyday life, whether in the quietude of the palace gardens or in the lively exchange of ideas in public forums. Her presence was a constant reminder of the values that had given rise to the reforms of her time. Neith's impact as a mother and mentor was not without its challenges. The demands of nurturing a family within a political environment fraught with intrigue and opposition were immense. There were moments when the pressures of state and the weight of public expectation threatened to overwhelm the tender space of familial life. During these times, Neith relied on her inner reserves of strength, a quiet fortitude nurtured through years of personal struggle and triumph. She often retreated into the sanctuary of her private study, a small chamber adorned with relics of her own childhood and the wisdom of past generations. There, in the solitude of dim candlelight and the gentle rustle of ancient scrolls, she would reflect on the dual roles she played as both a guardian of state and a nurturer of life. These moments of introspection allowed her to reconcile the competing demands of duty and love, emerging each time with a renewed commitment to the well-being of her children and the future they represented. In public, her reputation as a wise and compassionate mentor spread far beyond the walls of the palace. The children who had once gathered in her informal sessions grew up to become voices of reason in a rapidly changing Egypt. Their successes in various fields, be it in the administration of local communities, the stewardship of cultural traditions, or the innovation of new practices in agriculture and commerce, served as living testaments to the power of Neith's teachings. In their achievements, the spirit of their mother was palpably present, echoing the gentle yet persistent influence that had guided her own life. Her methods, often subtle and imbued with the poetic cadence of ancient wisdom, became models for future generations of leaders who sought to balance the imperatives of progress with the enduring values of their heritage. In the eyes of the Egyptian people, Neith's role as a mother transcended the boundaries of blood and lineage. She became a symbol of the nurturing spirit that was essential for the regeneration of a civilization, an embodiment of the belief that the future of a nation lay in the careful cultivation of its youth. Whether through her direct interactions with her own children or through the broader mentorship programs she championed, she left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of Egypt. Her teachings were recited in homes, inscribed on temple walls, and even echoed in the folk songs of the villages along the Nile. These stories, passed down through countless generations, celebrated not only the reforms of a transformative era but also the quiet, enduring power of a mother's love. Yet, amidst the accolades and the widespread recognition of her contributions, Neith remained humble, a woman deeply aware that her achievements were not hers alone, but were the product of a shared journey with her children and her people. In her later years, as she observed the fruits of her labor blossoming in every corner of the kingdom, she took solace in the knowledge that the seeds she had sown would continue to flourish long after her time had passed. In quiet moments of reflection, she would watch her children, now grown and standing as pillars of the community, and feel a profound sense of fulfillment. They were the living legacy of her life, a testament to the enduring power of nurturing, guidance, and unwavering love. The story of Neith's role as a mother and mentor is, in many ways, a microcosm of the broader narrative of Egypt itself, a civilization built on the dual pillars of tradition and transformation, where the past and the future were inextricably linked by the common thread of human experience. In the gentle lessons imparted by a wise mother, the timeless wisdom of ancient lore was passed on to the next generation, ensuring that the spirit of Egypt would continue to burn brightly, even in the face of change. As twilight deepened over the palace and the horizon of the Nile glowed with the soft hues of dusk, Neith's legacy as a nurturer of the future shone like a beacon of hope. Her life, woven with both the trials of state and the tender moments of familial intimacy, became a living parable, a reminder that the true measure of a leader lies not in the power they wield, but in the lives they enrich and the hearts they inspire, in the gentle cadence of her lullabies, in the patient explanations of ancient rites, and in the quiet strength with which she balanced the demands of public duty and private love. Neith imparted to her children the most enduring lesson of all, that the future is crafted not solely by the forces of conquest and authority, but by the simple, steadfast acts of nurturing and compassion. In the years that followed, as her children carried forward her legacy into every facet of Egyptian society, the teachings of Neith became a cherished inheritance, a living testament to the power of a mother's influence. Their accomplishments, whether in the realms of governance, scholarship, or community service, stood as evidence of a legacy that was as vibrant as it was enduring. And though the annals of history often extol the deeds of pharaohs and generals, it was the quiet, persistent influence of a compassionate mother that had laid the very foundation upon which the future of Egypt was built. Thus, in the story of a great civilization, the chapter dedicated to Neith's role as both a nurturing mother and a visionary mentor remains a poignant reminder that the strength of a nation is measured not merely by its monuments or military might, but by the hearts and minds of its people molded by the enduring, gentle hands of those who dare to dream of a better tomorrow. And in the timeless flow of the Nile, as it continued to nourish the land and echo the songs of generations past and future, the legacy of Neith's love and wisdom lived on, a luminous beacon guiding Egypt into an ever brighter age. In the wake of years filled with transformation and subtle revolution within the palace, the later years of Pepi II's reign began to unfold like the long, steady flow of the Nile itself, a dynasty in motion, propelled by the intertwined forces of tradition and innovation. As Pepi II grew older, the weight of his nearly century-long rule bore both the wisdom of experience and the inevitable burden of fatigue. Yet, within him burned an unyielding desire to see Egypt flourish, and his later years would come to be defined by an intricate dance between steadfast resolve and a gentle openness to change. A dance that echoed the influence of Neith and the many reforms that had taken root in his realm. It was during this period that the grand tapestry of Egypt's destiny was both tested and enriched by a multitude of challenges and triumphs. In the grand corridors of the palace, where the echoes of ancient decrees mingled with the whispers of newly penned policies, the aging pharaoh began to delegate greater responsibilities to those he had nurtured under the careful guidance of Neith. His court, once dominated by advisors steeped in the old ways, now included a new generation of officials who had absorbed the lessons of empathy, pragmatism, and visionary leadership, They were the heirs of a legacy that had transformed Egypt from a static bastion of tradition into a dynamic, living organism, one capable of adapting, evolving, and inspiring hope among its people. Pepi II, whose youthful ascent to the throne had once been marked by the uncertainty and vulnerability of early leadership, now commanded his realm with a measured dignity. His eyes, though lined with the passage of time, still shone with a quiet intensity, a reflection of a man who had borne the trials of power and emerged tempered by both triumphs and tribulations. In his later years, the pharaoh's priorities began to shift from the immediate concerns of military might and political maneuvering to a more enduring vision for the future, a vision that embraced the long-term prosperity and unity of Egypt. His reflections often turned to the foundations upon which his reign had been built, the reforms nurtured by Neith's gentle wisdom, the cultural renaissance sparked by open intellectual discourse, and the many small, unheralded victories that had steadily improved the lives of his subjects. Amid the bustling activity of palace life, the pharaoh found solace in quiet moments of introspection. Often, in the twilight hours, he would retreat to a secluded terrace overlooking the banks of the mighty Nile. There, with the soft murmur of the river and the distant silhouettes of temple spires etched against the fading sky, he contemplated the legacy of his rule and the destiny of his people. In these contemplative interludes, the pharaoh's thoughts wandered back to the early days of his reign, those tumultuous yet hopeful years when the union with Neith had ignited a spark of renewal in his heart. The memories of their first meetings, the gentle but persuasive counsel that had steered him away from the pitfalls of unchecked power, and the quiet revolution of ideas that had reformed the very structure of his administration were etched deeply in his mind. Each recollection served as both a reminder of the challenges overcome and a beacon guiding him toward a future where Egypt could stand as a testament to wisdom and compassion. As the dynasty moved steadily forward, the kingdom itself seemed to mirror the natural rhythms of the Nile. In the rural heartlands, the improvements in agriculture and resource management, once uncertain experiments in reform, had blossomed into practices that allowed the people to harvest abundantly even in lean years. The once precarious balance between the whims of nature and the perseverance of human effort had been reestablished on firmer ground, thanks in no small measure to policies that prioritized sustainable growth and the equitable distribution of wealth. Farmers, whose lives had long been at the mercy of the river's caprice, now found that innovative irrigation techniques and community-led cooperatives had softened the blows of drought and flood. Their gratitude was not expressed in grand declarations, but in the humble, persistent hope that filled the air during the annual celebrations of the inundation, a hope that had come to symbolize the renewal of life and the promise of a future unburdened by despair. In the sprawling urban centers along the Nile, the cultural landscape of Egypt was undergoing a subtle yet profound metamorphosis. The intellectual salons that had been inaugurated in the earlier days of reform now thrived as hubs of debate and creative expression. In these lively gatherings, poets recited verses that blended the cadence of ancient hymns with the innovations of new thought, while scholars exchanged ideas that transcended the boundaries of time and geography. The arts, nurtured by a state that now valued cultural expression as much as administrative efficiency, began to flourish in ways that were both unexpected and deeply resonant. In the galleries of the palace and the humble quarters of provincial towns alike, murals and sculptures celebrated not only the glory of past pharaohs, but also the dynamic spirit of an Egypt that dared to dream of a brighter, more inclusive future. Yet, as with all periods of profound transformation, the later years of Pepi II's reign were not free from the tremors of disquiet and the challenges posed by shifting allegiances. Even as the reforms had consolidated the power of the central authority, there remained pockets of resistance among those who clung to the old order with a fervor born of tradition and fear of change. In the remote corners of the kingdom, local chieftains and conservative factions sometimes chafed under policies that redistributed power and wealth in ways that disrupted long-standing hierarchies. These elements, though increasingly marginal in the grand scheme, periodically stirred unrest, a reminder that the process of renewal was always accompanied by the need to reconcile competing interests. The pharaoh, aware of the delicate balance that sustained his realm, employed both patience and strategic firmness in addressing these challenges. In councils that were as much about negotiation as they were about authority, he demonstrated that the strength of a ruler lay not in his ability to suppress dissent, but in his capacity to incorporate diverse voices into a shared vision of progress. Throughout these years of transition, the relationship between Pepi II and Neith remained a cornerstone of the kingdom's stability and evolution, though the pharaoh's responsibilities had multiplied with the passage of time. Neith's presence, her wisdom, her empathy, and her unwavering commitment to the betterment of Egypt continued to serve as a guiding light. The queen, who had once been a fierce advocate for reform in the shadow of the throne, now found herself playing the role of a venerable matriarch, a keeper of traditions and a mentor to the next generation of leaders. Her counsel, though less frequent as the demands of court and state took precedence, was sought with a reverence that belied her humble beginnings. In private audiences and quiet conversations, the aging queen and the seasoned pharaoh would reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point, marveling at the unexpected ways in which a union forged in youth had matured into a partnership that had redefined the destiny of an entire civilization. In the sprawling tapestry of Egypt's history, the later years of Pepi II's reign came to be seen as a period of both culmination and transformation. The dynasty, long rooted in the glory of ancient tradition, had taken on a new vitality, a motion not of abrupt revolution but of gradual, steady evolution. This was an age when the lessons of the past were interwoven with the innovations of the present to create a resilient fabric of society. The institutions of government, enriched by reforms that had been conceived in the quiet hours of the palace and the bustling activity of provincial towns, were now capable of adapting to the changing needs of a diverse population. Trade flourished along the banks of the Nile and beyond, as diplomatic ties were forged with distant lands through a careful balance of military prudence and cultural exchange. In every corner of the kingdom, from the opulent halls of Memphis to the sun-baked villages in the desert, the legacy of enlightened governance was felt, a tangible assurance that Egypt was not merely surviving but thriving. As the pharaoh's later years advanced, a sense of measured inevitability permeated the corridors of power. The realization that the end of an era was approaching was met not with despair but with a calm, resolute acceptance that the mantle of leadership must eventually pass to those who had been groomed by experience and vision. Pepi II, in his quiet wisdom, had long prepared for this eventuality. His careful nurturing of capable successors, many of whom had been mentored directly by Neith, ensured that the future of the dynasty was secured not by the force of inheritance alone, but by the enduring strength of collective purpose. In his final years, the pharaoh took solace in the knowledge that the seeds of reform, sown with such painstaking care over decades, would continue to blossom long after his departure from the world stage. In moments of solitary reflection, as he gazed upon the enduring monuments of his forefathers and contemplated the vast, unending course of the Nile, Pepi II would recall the early days of his reign with a bittersweet nostalgia. He remembered the fervor of youthful ambition, the thrill of daring to challenge convention, and the quiet yet persistent influence of a woman named Neith, whose voice had become synonymous with hope and progress. The pharaoh understood that the true measure of his reign was not in the longevity of his time on the throne, but in the legacy he would leave behind, a legacy woven from the threads of compassion, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to the well-being of his people. The later years of Pepi II's reign, marked by the steady evolution of a dynasty in motion, became a living chronicle of Egypt's ability to endure and adapt. The reforms that had been met with cautious skepticism in the early days had matured into pillars of stability that underpinned every aspect of Egyptian life. In the quiet hum of administrative offices, in the vibrant exchanges of ideas in public squares, and in the solemn ceremonies held in ancient temples, the spirit of renewal was palpable, a silent, persistent force that spoke of the eternal capacity for growth and transformation. In the end, as the pharaoh's health began to wane and the inevitable transition of power loomed on the horizon. The people of Egypt looked back on his reign not merely as a long chapter in their history, but as a transformative era defined by the harmonious interplay of tradition and innovation. His legacy, nurtured by the steadfast influence of Neith and carried forward by the generations she had touched, would endure as a beacon of enlightened leadership, a testament to the enduring strength of a civilization that refused to be confined by the limitations of its past. Thus, as the sun set over the vast expanse of the desert and cast long, golden shadows across the fertile banks of the Nile, the later years of Pepi II's reign stood as a majestic culmination of a lifetime of perseverance and vision. In that twilight of a storied dynasty, where every stone in the ancient temples whispered secrets of forgotten glory and every ripple of the river carried the promise of renewal, Egypt continued its eternal journey, a journey marked by the quiet persistence of reform, the unyielding power of compassion, and the timeless legacy of a pharaoh who had learned to see his role not merely as a ruler, but as a guardian of his people's future. And so, the dynasty moved forward, a living, breathing testament to the idea that even as individual lives fade into the mists of time, the spirit of progress endures, carried forward on the wings of wisdom, nurtured by the hands of those who dare to imagine a better tomorrow. The later years of Pepi II's reign, with all their challenges, triumphs, and quiet moments of reflection, remain etched in the annals of Egyptian history, a chapter of profound transformation, a dynasty in motion that continues to inspire all who believe in the power of enlightened leadership and the enduring promise of renewal. In the quiet, hallowed corridors of the royal palace, where the whispers of ancient deities intermingled with the echoes of modern aspirations, a subtle revolution was being meticulously crafted. Though the public I saw the grandeur of reforms, the official proclamations of a renewed state, and the majestic legacy of a long-reigning pharaoh, few could fathom the hidden architect behind it all, Neith, in a role that was as clandestine as it was transformative. Neith orchestrated a silent symphony of progress and renewal, shaping the destiny of Egypt not through overt displays of power but through quiet determination, thoughtful guidance, and a deep understanding of both human nature and divine will. Neith's influence was not marked by the fanfare of public ceremonies or the inscribed decrees that graced temple walls. Rather, it was manifested in the soft-spoken counsel offered to ministers in private, in the careful selection of advisors who would one day carry her vision into the future, and in the intricate strategies devised behind closed doors to secure the welfare of the kingdom. While the pharaoh's reign was celebrated for its outward splendor and the reforms that visibly transformed society, it was Neith's subtle, behind-the-scenes leadership that had provided the critical framework upon which these successes were built. In the labyrinthine passages of the palace, where the light of torches danced upon walls adorned with hieroglyphs chronicling the glories of bygone eras, Neith convened secret councils with trusted confidants, men and women whose loyalty to the cause of progress was as steadfast as their devotion to the gods. These gatherings were held in rooms known only to a few, hidden away from the prying eyes of conservative factions who clung to the vestiges of the old order. In these intimate settings, Neith's voice was gentle yet unwavering, her language imbued with the weight of wisdom drawn from both sacred lore and the lived experience of a people who had weathered countless seasons of hardship and hope. Her approach was methodical. Neith began by identifying the structural weaknesses within the kingdom's administrative apparatus, flaws that had, over centuries, allowed corruption to fester and the voices of the common people to be drowned out by the clamor of elite interests. In one such clandestine meeting, held beneath a vaulted ceiling where the stars of a desert night could be glimpsed through a small oculus, she laid out her vision for a reformed system of governance. "We must construct," she declared softly, "a framework that channels the ancient strength of Egypt not into the pursuit of power for power's sake, but into the nurturing of our people and the perpetuation of justice. It is not enough for a kingdom to stand tall if its foundations are riddled with inequity." Her words, measured and persuasive, resonated deeply with those present. They were not merely directives but invitations, calls to join in a quiet revolution that would transform the very essence of leadership in Egypt. One of the cornerstones of Neith's behind-the-scenes leadership was her insistence on education and the diffusion of knowledge. Recognizing that the power to govern wisely lay in understanding the complexities of the human spirit as well as the mysteries of the natural world. She spearheaded the establishment of a discrete network of academies. These institutions, hidden within the labyrinth of palace courtyards and secluded temple annexes, became sanctuaries where scribes, philosophers, scientists, and artists could gather to exchange ideas freely. Here, the ancient wisdom of the past was studied alongside innovative methods that promised to improve the future. In these academies, scrolls were unrolled and illuminated not only with the tales of gods and kings but with treatises on agricultural management, civic administration, and even early notions of diplomacy. Neith believed that the intellectual empowerment of a society was the greatest bulwark against tyranny and stagnation, and she worked quietly but relentlessly to ensure that the future generations would inherit a legacy of enlightened thought. Her influence extended well into the realm of fiscal and administrative reform, even as public decrees began to bear the mark of a more compassionate, forward-thinking regime. It was Neith who had, in the early hours of many long nights, labored over the intricate details of state finance. In a series of secret consultations with the kingdom's most astute accountants and resource managers, she devised strategies to streamline taxation, eliminate wasteful expenditures, and channel funds into projects that would benefit the common people, from the repair of irrigation channels to the construction of communal granaries. These initiatives, though executed under the patronage of the Pharaoh's public authority, bore the unmistakable imprint of Neith's meticulous planning and her enduring commitment to the welfare of every Egyptian. Her proposals were often couched in the language of balance and sustainability, a reminder that just as the Nile must be managed to harness its life-giving floods without succumbing to destructive torrents, so too must the state's resources be governed with foresight and restraint. While her administrative reforms were vital to the kingdom's prosperity, it was in the realm of cultural and religious renewal that Neith's true genius shone. In ancient Egypt, where the spiritual and the secular were inextricably linked, the sanctity of tradition had long been both a source of identity and an impediment to progress. The temples, with their solemn rituals and inscrutable ceremonies, were revered as the repositories of divine favor, but were also often insulated from the practical concerns of everyday life. Neith, ever the bridge between the ethereal and the tangible, sought to rejuvenate religious practice by making it more inclusive and responsive to the needs of the populace. In discreet dialogues with influential priests and temple scholars, she advocated for a reinterpretation of sacred texts, a dynamic reading that honored the old stories while making room for new insights. Her vision was not one of abandonment of the past but of evolution, a belief that the divine was ever-changing and that the ways of worship must likewise adapt to ensure that the God's blessings flowed freely to all segments of society. Her proposals led to subtle but significant changes in the structure of temple ceremonies. Rather than limiting the rituals to an exclusive priestly caste, Neith championed the idea that communal participation could enrich the spiritual life of the nation. In carefully orchestrated experiments, certain festivals were opened up to broader participation, allowing common citizens to take part in the rites that had, for so long, been the preserve of the elite. This move not only democratized the sacred but also fostered a sense of unity and collective identity among the people, a unity that had the power to transform society from within. The success of these initiatives, though not widely publicized for fear of inciting the ire of conservative traditionalists, spread quietly throughout the kingdom. In remote villages and bustling market towns alike, there emerged a renewed appreciation for the interplay between divine tradition and human creativity, a dynamic that promised to sustain the cultural vibrancy of Egypt for generations to come. Yet, the path of the hidden architect was not without peril. Neith's quiet subversion of entrenched power structures inevitably aroused suspicion and hostility among those who had long benefited from the status quo. There were moments when clandestine gatherings were nearly discovered by spies loyal to the old order, and when whispers of treachery began to circulate in the darker corners of the palace. In one such instance, a faction of influential priests, alarmed by the apparent erosion of their authority, conspired in secret to discredit the reforms that bore Neith's unmistakable signature. They set about spreading rumors that the hidden academies were breeding grounds for dangerous, heretical ideas, that the new interpretations of sacred texts were not inspired by divine wisdom, but by subversive ambitions aimed at undermining the very foundation of Egypt's religious traditions. For a time, the threat of scandal hung over the palace like a dark cloud, threatening to unravel the careful work that had been so painstakingly woven. But Neith, with the poise and resilience of one who had weathered countless storms, met these challenges with quiet fortitude. In a series of decisive, behind-the-scenes maneuvers, she marshaled the support of influential scholars and reform-minded priests who recognized that the future of Egypt depended not on clinging to obsolete customs, but on the willingness to embrace the possibilities of renewal. In hushed meetings held under the cover of darkness, she laid bare the truth of her vision, one that celebrated the timeless wisdom of the past while daring to imagine a more just and dynamic society. Her calm, reasoned arguments gradually dispelled the murmurings of dissent, and the conspiracies that had threatened to destabilize the reform movement were neutralized by the overwhelming force of collective determination. Throughout these turbulent times, Neith remained an ever-present, though often unseen, guiding force. Her interactions with key figures in the government, the military, and the religious establishment were marked by a subtle artistry, a mastery of diplomacy that allowed her to build bridges where others saw only insurmountable chasms. In private audiences with high-ranking officials, she employed a blend of gentle persuasion and incisive logic, urging them to consider not only the immediate benefits of her proposals but also their long-term implications for the welfare of the kingdom. Her approach was not confrontational but consultative, emphasizing that the reforms she championed were not a repudiation of the past, but rather a necessary adaptation to the evolving challenges of the present. It was this remarkable ability to reconcile seemingly opposing forces, a respect for tradition coupled with a fierce commitment to progress, that earned her the enduring loyalty of those who worked with her. One of the most enduring testaments to Neith's behind-the-scenes leadership was the way in which she transformed the very culture of the palace. The halls that had once been stifling with rigid protocol gradually became spaces of vibrant intellectual exchange. Informal gatherings, once the exclusive domain of the highest echelons of power, now included voices from diverse walks of life: scribes, artisans, even representatives of local communities. These meetings, held in quiet alcoves and shaded courtyards, were not public spectacles but sincere forums for the exchange of ideas. Here, in the soft glow of evening lamps and amidst the gentle rustle of papyrus scrolls, Neith fostered an atmosphere where questions were welcomed and innovation was celebrated. The transformation was subtle but profound. Over time, the palace itself seemed to breathe a new spirit, a spirit that valued not only the continuity of ancient tradition, but also the creative spark of human ingenuity. Neith's influence also extended to the realm of personal mentorship. Many of the young advisors who later ascended to positions of significant authority in the government were, in their formative years, nurtured under her careful guidance. She recognized early on that the future of the state depended on cultivating a cadre of leaders who possessed both intellectual acuity and moral integrity. In private sessions held in a secluded wing of the palace, where the clamor of official business gave way to the quiet murmurs of thoughtful conversation, she imparted lessons on governance, ethics, and the delicate balance between power and compassion. Her teachings, often couched in the rich symbolism of ancient myth and tempered by the practical realities of contemporary politics, left an indelible mark on those who would go on to shape Egypt's destiny. These protégés, many of whom would later recount their time spent under her tutelage as the most transformative period of their lives, became the living embodiment of Neith's vision, a new generation of leaders whose hearts were as open as their minds were sharp. Yet, for all her successes, Neith's role as the hidden architect was, by design, shrouded in the quiet dignity of anonymity. She never sought the adulation that accompanied public accolades, preferring instead the satisfaction of knowing that her work, though often unseen, had contributed to the enduring strength and prosperity of her beloved Egypt. In a society that celebrated the grandeur of pharaohs and the splendor of monumental architecture, her legacy was inscribed not on towering obelisks but in the everyday lives of the people, in the thriving fields, in the spirited debates held in village squares, and in the quiet confidence with which citizens faced the uncertainties of tomorrow. In later years, as the reforms she had helped conceive began to bear fruit in every corner of the kingdom, those who had once whispered about the mysterious influence behind the scenes came to recognize that true power often resided in the subtle art of quiet leadership. In the eyes of the people, Neith became a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that the strength of a civilization lay not in ostentatious displays of might, but in the steadfast, compassionate guidance that nurtured its very soul. Her legacy, though carefully hidden from the glaring spotlight of official history, was woven into the fabric of Egypt's Renaissance. The academies she had founded continued to flourish, producing scholars whose treatises bridged the ancient and the modern. The administrative reforms she had championed provided a stable foundation for economic growth, ensuring that the kingdom's resources were managed with both prudence and foresight. And the cultural revitalization she had quietly set in motion transformed the royal palace into a vibrant crucible of artistic and intellectual achievement, one that would continue to inspire future generations long after her passing. In private moments, when the corridors of power fell silent and the responsibilities of leadership gave way to reflective solitude, those who had served alongside her recalled with quiet reverence the lessons she had imparted. True leadership, she would say in hushed tones, is not measured by the accolades we receive or the monuments we erect, but by the lives we touch and the hope we kindle in the hearts of our people. Such words, spoken with the weight of experience and the gentleness of a nurturer, remained with her disciples as guiding principles, a beacon of wisdom that outshone even the most imposing symbols of royal authority. Thus, while the annals of history often record the deeds of pharaohs and the triumphs of military conquests, the enduring legacy of Neith, the hidden architect of a reformed Egypt, resides in the quiet, persistent impact of her behind-the-scenes leadership. It is a legacy that reminds us that sometimes the most profound transformations are not heralded by grand spectacles, but are born in the silent, unassuming acts of compassion, reason, and steadfast commitment to a better tomorrow. In the twilight of her years, as the kingdom she had helped to reshape continued to prosper and evolve, Neith would often wander the palace gardens under a sky strewn with stars. In those serene moments, the soft rustling of palm fronds and the distant murmur of the Nile provided a gentle counterpoint to the weight of history that lay on her shoulders. There, in the quiet embrace of nature, she would reflect on the journey that had brought her from humble beginnings to the very heart of a transformed civilization. And though the world at large might never fully grasp the depth of her influence, those who had known her understood that her true genius lay in her ability to see beyond the immediate, a vision that anticipated the needs of a future yet to be written. The hidden architect's work was never done in isolation. It was a tapestry of countless interactions, subtle negotiations, and the unwavering trust of those who believed in her vision. In every policy reformed, every cultural initiative launched, and every young mind enlightened, there lay the indelible mark of Neith's presence, a presence that, though never ostentatious, proved to be the most enduring force behind Egypt's Renaissance. As the pages of history continue to be written, the story of Neith the quiet, persistent, and transformative leader remains a testament to the power of hidden influence. It is a reminder that behind every great legacy, there is often an unseen hand that shapes destiny with the light of wisdom, the strength of compassion, and the courage to envision a better future for all. And in the eternal flow of the Nile, amid the timeless monuments of Egypt, the spirit of Neith endures, a luminous beacon guiding generations toward a horizon of hope, unity, and renewal. in the unfolding tapestry of Egypt's renewed destiny. The legacy of Neith rippled far beyond the immediate corridors of palace power and the quiet revolution of reform. As the years passed and the kingdom stabilized under enlightened rule, the seeds of destiny that Neith had so carefully sown began to take root in the lives of her own children and in the hearts of a new generation of leaders. These successors, nurtured by her teachings and molded by the transformative spirit she instilled, emerged as living embodiments of her vision, a vision of governance, compassion, and wisdom that would define Egypt for centuries to come. The early echoes of Neith's influence on her progeny were evident in every facet of their upbringing. In the private sanctum of the palace, where her children learned not only the formal protocols of court but also the timeless lessons of humility and service, the mother's gentle yet unwavering presence guided their every step. Under her careful tutelage, they imbibed lessons that transcended rote instruction. Evening after evening, as the palace settled into a contemplative hush and the gentle sounds of the Nile provided a natural lullaby, Neith would recount the tales of ancient gods and heroes, of battles fought not merely with weapons but with the power of intellect and empathy. Through these stories, she imparted an understanding that true strength was measured not in the force of one's arm but in the capacity to listen, to learn, and to act with a generous heart. Her eldest, a son whose eyes held the calm determination of one who had seen both the light and the shadows of power, absorbed these lessons with a solemnity that belied his youth. From his earliest days, he had been drawn to the quiet wisdom of his mother, finding in her words both solace and inspiration. Over time, his natural talents flourished. He became a keen strategist in the realm of governance and a thoughtful mediator in disputes that threatened to disrupt the delicate balance of the court. His measured approach, a blend of traditional reverence and innovative thinking, soon earned him the trust of not only his peers but also of the senior advisors who had once been skeptical of change. His evolving role in the administration signified the first true manifestation of Neith's legacy, a leadership forged not in the crucible of conquest, but in the steady, deliberate process of nurturing and mentorship. Yet it was not only in the realm of political and administrative acumen that Neith's children bore her mark. Her daughter, whose spirited intelligence and empathetic nature mirrored her mother's own qualities, emerged as a formidable force in the cultural renaissance that was sweeping across Egypt. In an era when art, literature, and philosophy were experiencing a vibrant revival, she became an ardent patron and active participant in the intellectual salons that were now a hallmark of palace life. Under her influence, poetry and prose took on new dimensions, infused with the themes of unity, compassion, and the perpetual interplay between tradition and modernity. Her writings, elegant yet accessible, resonated deeply with a society that was eager to reconcile its storied past with the demands of a progressive future. In many ways, she became a cultural ambassador, bridging the gap between the revered wisdom of the ancients and the innovative spirit of contemporary Egypt. Through public readings, private discourses, and even through the commissioning of artistic works that celebrated the intertwined destinies of gods and mortals, her voice became one of the enduring anthems of a nation reborn. Beyond the immediate family, Neith's vision extended to a broader circle of successors, young leaders drawn from the many corners of the kingdom who had been touched by her reforms and inspired by her example. Recognizing that the future of Egypt depended not solely on the lineage of royalty but on the collective empowerment of its people, she initiated a series of informal mentorship programs. These gatherings, held in quiet rooms away from the formalities of state, brought together promising youths from diverse backgrounds, sons and daughters of merchants, scribes, and even humble farmers who had demonstrated a rare spark of brilliance and an unyielding commitment to the common good. In these sessions, Neith's approach was that of both teacher and confidant. She encouraged open dialogue, urging her protégés to question conventional wisdom and to seek innovative solutions to long-standing problems. The discussions ranged from practical matters, such as improved techniques for water management and equitable taxation, to more abstract inquiries into the nature of justice, the responsibilities of leadership, and the role of the divine in everyday life. In a society where the old order had often stifled free expression, these gatherings became crucibles of new thought, places where ideas could flow unimpeded by tradition's rigid constraints. The young men and women who emerged from these sessions carried with them a deep-seated conviction that the strength of Egypt lay in the harmonious blending of its illustrious past with the transformative power of progressive ideas. As the successors matured and assumed roles of increasing responsibility within the administration, the impact of Neith's influence began to materialize in tangible ways. In regional centers along the fertile banks of the Nile, local governors, many of whom had been among those mentored by Neith, introduced reforms that improved agricultural productivity, streamlined local governance, and fostered a spirit of communal participation. Villages that had long languished under the yoke of bureaucratic inefficiency began to flourish, their people empowered by policies that prioritized education, equitable resource distribution, and the preservation of cultural heritage. In the bustling markets of Memphis and Thebes, traders and artisans found that the stability and foresight of their local leaders translated into renewed economic vitality. Public works projects, such as the repair of ancient canals and the construction of communal granaries, were implemented with a level of efficiency and empathy that had once been the exclusive purview of the central government. It was as if the very essence of Neith's teachings, of caring for one's fellow citizens, of balancing the wisdom of the past with the needs of the present, had become woven into the everyday fabric of Egyptian life. The ripple effect of Neith's mentorship was also keenly felt in the realm of education and intellectual pursuit. The academies she had secretly established during her own years of behind-the-scenes leadership had, by now, grown into respected centers of learning, under the stewardship of her former protégés. These institutions expanded their curricula to include not only the study of sacred texts and ancient history, but also emerging fields of science, philosophy, and art. Scholars who had once been confined to the isolated study of dogmatic tradition found themselves engaged in spirited debates that spanned disciplines and transcended the boundaries of their inherited lore. In lecture halls and public forums, the ideas that had germinated in the quiet mentoring sessions were now blossoming into full-fledged movements, redefining what it meant to be an intellectual in a society that was rapidly evolving. Diplomatically, the successors of Neith began to forge alliances that would secure Egypt's position on the international stage for years to come. Having learned from their mentor that strength lay not in isolation but in mutual respect and shared progress, they reached out to neighboring kingdoms with a blend of firmness and cordiality. Treaties that had once been seen as relics of a bygone era were renegotiated with an eye toward cooperation and long-term stability. In councils convened in palatial halls and along the borders of the kingdom, these young diplomats carried forward Neith's legacy of balance, ensuring that Egypt would be both a bastion of ancient tradition and a progressive force in the wider world. Yet, amid these many successes, the journey of Neith's children and their successors was not without its challenges. As with any transformative process, the path forward was strewn with obstacles, moments when entrenched interests and the inertia of old traditions threatened to undermine the gains that had been so painstakingly achieved. In these moments, the lessons imparted by Neith during her years of quiet guidance proved to be invaluable. Leaders who had been shaped by her example often found themselves at a crossroads, their decisions weighing heavily not only on the immediate welfare of their communities but on the future trajectory of the nation as a whole. It was in such instances that the memory of Neith's steady counsel, her gentle insistence on justice and compassion, and her unwavering commitment to a vision of inclusive progress served as a beacon. They recalled the wisdom that had been passed down to them in hushed conversations by the palace gardens, the fervent discussions held in the sanctuaries of the hidden academies, and the quiet moments of introspection shared under starlit Egyptian skies. These memories fortified their resolve, enabling them to navigate political turbulence with a clear-eyed focus on the greater good. In time, the influence of Neith's legacy became so deeply embedded in the fabric of Egyptian society that it transformed the very concept of leadership itself. No longer was leadership defined solely by the ability to wield power or to command armies. It was reimagined as a collaborative endeavor, one that required empathy, intellectual rigor, and an unyielding dedication to the welfare of all citizens. The successors of Neith, whether in positions of direct political authority, cultural leadership, or intellectual inquiry, embraced this redefined notion with passion. They became champions of a governance model that was participatory and progressive, a model that recognized that the future of a civilization was built not on the accumulation of power in a single figure but on the collective strength of a well-informed, compassionate populace. As decades turned into centuries, the seeds of destiny sown by Neith blossomed into a resplendent legacy that would endure the test of time. Statues were erected in her honor, not in the vain tradition of glorifying the self-aggrandizing deeds of rulers, but as a tribute to the quiet force of mentorship and the transformative power of nurturing future generations. In the halls of academies and in the archives of temple libraries, her name became synonymous with the ideals of balance, justice, and enlightened leadership. Every new generation that encountered her legacy was reminded that true greatness is not measured solely by the monuments we build, but by the lives we enrich and the hope we instill in the hearts of others. In the collective memory of Egypt, the impact of Neith's children and their successors grew to symbolize a turning point in the nation's long and storied history, a moment when the seeds of a visionary mother took root in the soil of a changing world and sprouted into a movement that redefined what it meant to govern with compassion and wisdom. As festivals celebrated the bounty of the Nile and public ceremonies extolled the virtues of justice and unity, the lessons of Neith's lifetime lived on in every policy enacted, every treaty signed, and every intellectual discourse that enriched the cultural heritage of the kingdom. In time, the story of Neith's legacy became interwoven with the mythology of Egypt, a living narrative that celebrated not only the grandeur of its past, but also the promise of its future. Her influence was reflected in the myriad reforms that continued to evolve, in the compassionate governance that touched the lives of the most humble citizens, and in the spirited debates held in the agora of ideas that now define the kingdom, and in the quiet, measured wisdom of those who had been nurtured by her example. The spirit of Neith, ever gentle, ever resolute, endured as a luminous beacon, guiding Egypt toward horizons of hope, unity, and perpetual renewal. Thus, the seeds of destiny that Neith had sown, nurtured through a lifetime of quiet leadership and tender mentorship, continued to shape the future of Egypt long after her days had passed. Her children and their successors carried her legacy forward, each generation adding new layers of insight, compassion, and progress to a foundation built on the timeless values of love and service. In the intricate dance of history, where the echoes of the past meet the aspirations of tomorrow, the story of Neith's influence remained a testament to the enduring power of nurturing the human spirit, a legacy that promised that even the gentlest of voices could change the destiny of a nation. And so, as the sun rose each morning over the fertile banks of the Nile, bathing the land in golden light and renewing the hope of its people, Egypt stood as a living monument to the transformative power of one visionary woman, a woman whose legacy, like the endless flow of the river itself, would continue to inspire, uplift, and guide future generations toward a destiny of endless promise. In the waning light of an era that had seen a profound transformation of Egypt's destiny, the final years of a storied life unfolded like the soft twilight that gently blankets the ancient land. As the relentless passage of time slowed its pace, the corridors of the royal palace, once filled with the vibrant chorus of reform and renewal, began to take on a reflective quality, a somber, yet hopeful meditation on the legacy that had been forged through decades of struggle, triumph, and quiet revolution. For Neith, whose life had been devoted to the nurturing of both the kingdom and the souls that populated it, the later years became a time of deep introspection, no longer at the forefront of the tumultuous debates or the secret councils that had so dramatically altered the course of governance. She now found herself in a quieter phase, a time when the whirlwind of political maneuverings and the fervor of cultural renaissance had subsided into a reflective calm. In the soft glow of early morning, As the first light of the sun touched the rippling surface of the Nile, Neith would often wander through the palace gardens, lost in thought and surrounded by the whispering voices of memory and legacy. The gardens, with their ancient date palms and clusters of fragrant lotus blossoms, had always been a sanctuary for her, a place where the tumult of statecraft could be momentarily set aside in favor of the timeless rhythms of nature. Here, among the rustling fronds and the gentle murmur of water from a small, carefully tended fountain, Neith's mind would drift back over the tapestry of her life. Each step along the garden path evoked recollections of days long past, the fervent discussions held in secret alcoves, the luminous exchange of ideas in the quiet halls of hidden academies, and the tender moments spent nurturing her children and guiding the next generation of leaders. These final years were not marked by the frenetic pace of youthful ambition or the fiery rhetoric of a revolutionary spirit. Instead, they were characterized by a deep, resonant calm, a reflective silence in which the echoes of every decision, every act of courage and compassion, intertwined with the enduring pulse of the Nile. In this contemplative state, Neith came to view her own life as part of the larger continuum of Egyptian history. She saw herself not merely as an individual who had weathered the storms of political upheaval and personal sacrifice, but as a vital thread woven into the enduring fabric of a civilization that had always prized wisdom, balance, and the transformative power of compassion. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over the majestic pyramids and the sprawling temples that had borne witness to millennia of triumphs and tragedies, Neith would often find herself reflecting on the nature of legacy. In the quiet solitude of her private study, a modest chamber lined with shelves of ancient scrolls, illuminated manuscripts, and the cherished mementos of a long and purposeful life, she would sit for hours, pen in hand, recording her thoughts and insights. Her writings, filled with the gentle cadence of introspection and the measured wisdom of a life fully lived, became a repository of lessons for future generations. In these pages, she wrote of the importance of maintaining balance in times of change, of cherishing the memories of the past while daring to dream of a better future, and of the need for leaders to govern not merely with authority, but with the deep, empathetic understanding of the human condition. For Neith, the reflection on her own legacy was intimately connected with the destiny of Egypt itself. The reforms she had once helped to nurture, those quiet yet powerful shifts in governance, education, and religious practice, had grown into an enduring structure that now sustained the lives of countless citizens. Across the kingdom, from the bustling markets of Memphis to the remote villages that dotted the fertile banks of the Nile, the impact of her vision was evident in the improved livelihoods, the renewed cultural vibrancy, and the sense of unity that had taken root over the decades. Every well-tended field, every community granary built with the intent of safeguarding the future against the caprices of nature, and every thoughtful discourse in the academies attested to the power of ideas sown by a visionary leader. Yet, in this twilight phase, Neith also recognized the inevitability of change. Just as the ancient river carved new channels through the desert over millennia, so too did the inevitable march of time usher in fresh challenges and new voices. She knew that her own role in the grand tapestry of Egyptian history was drawing to a close, and that the mantle of leadership, nurtured through her years of subtle influence and relentless dedication, would soon be passed on to a generation that had grown under the bright legacy of her mentorship. Rather than mourning the end of her active role, she embraced this transition with the graceful acceptance of one who had lived in harmony with the cycles of nature. In her heart, there was a serene satisfaction, a quiet joy in knowing that the seeds she had planted would continue to blossom, long after her footsteps had faded from the marble corridors of the palace. In the final days of her life, Neith made it a point to gather with those closest to her, her children, her most trusted advisors, and the young leaders whose futures had been so deeply intertwined with her own. In these intimate gatherings, held in the cool comfort of twilight, they would share memories of past glories and gentle laughter at moments of shared vulnerability. The conversations were imbued with a bittersweet poignancy, a recognition that while the present was fleeting, the lessons of the past would endure as a guiding light for the future. In one such evening, as a soft rain began to fall over the ancient city, Neith spoke quietly to a circle of attentive faces. "Our lives," she said, her voice soft yet clear, "are like the tributaries of the great Nile. Each one, though small and transient on its own, contributes to the vast, enduring flow of history. Do not be dismayed by the passing of a day, for in every sunrise and every sunset lies the promise of renewal, of hope reborn in the cycle of life." Her words, simple in their truth yet profound in their implication, resonated deeply with those gathered. They understood that the legacy of a true leader was not measured by the accolades of the present, but by the lasting impact on the hearts and minds of the people. In the gentle cadence of her reflections, they heard the eternal wisdom of a woman who had dedicated her life not to the pursuit of power, but to the uplifting of a nation, a legacy that, like the eternal flow of the Nile, would continue to nourish and sustain Egypt for generations to come. As the twilight deepened into the velvety darkness of night, the palace itself seemed to exhale a collective sigh, a gentle acknowledgement of a life whose work had been both immense and intimate. The stars emerged in the sky, ancient and unchanging, their light a reminder of the eternal continuity of time and the lasting imprints of those who dared to dream of a better world. In these quiet moments, as Neith looked up at the heavens, she felt a profound connection to the infinite expanse of the universe, a connection that spoke of the shared destiny of all living things and the timeless interplay of light and shadow, creation and decay. In the final chapters of her journey, Neith did not seek to etch her name into stone or to be remembered through grand monuments. Instead, she entrusted her legacy to the gentle art of living, a legacy woven into the fabric of everyday existence. In the laughter of children playing along the banks of the Nile, in the quiet determination of farmers tending their fields, and in the thoughtful conversations of scholars who continued to explore the mysteries of life. Her influence, though subtle and often hidden from the grand narratives of history, was a constant undercurrent in the lives of those she had touched. It was a testament to the power of a quiet, resolute spirit, one that recognized that true greatness is measured not by the permanence of monuments, but by the enduring capacity to inspire hope, foster understanding, and nurture the human spirit. In the hushed moments before dawn, when the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of a new day, Neith's legacy shone forth as a beacon of quiet strength. Her life had been a tapestry of gentle revolutions, of whispered reforms and patient acts of kindness that, cumulatively, had transformed not only the face of a nation but the very soul of its people. As Egypt continued its eternal journey along the winding course of the Nile, the lessons of her life remained, a legacy of compassion, wisdom, and the steadfast belief that even in the fading light of twilight, there is a promise of renewal. Thus, as the final pages of her story were written in the annals of time, Neith's reflections became an enduring echo, a reminder that the true measure of a life well lived is found not in the fleeting applause of mortal acclaim, but in the quiet, persistent ripple of hope that continues to spread long after the final curtain has fallen. In the tranquil stillness of those final hours, with the ancient monuments standing guard and the eternal river carrying the secrets of ages past, the legacy of Neith whispered softly to the world that the power of a compassionate heart and an unyielding spirit can, indeed, shape the destiny of nations and light the way for countless generations to come. And so, in the gentle embrace of twilight and the reflective silence of a storied life, Neith's journey came full circle, a journey marked by the delicate interplay of duty and love, tradition and transformation, sorrow and hope. Her legacy, like the timeless flow of the Nile, would forever be a part of Egypt's soul, a luminous reminder that even as the light of one era fades, its echoes continue to guide the promise of tomorrow. In the final chapter of this storied saga, As the sun dipped below the timeless horizon of Egypt and the gentle murmurs of the Nile whispered secrets of millennia past, the legacy of Neith emerged as an eternal beacon, a living testament to the transformative power of compassion, wisdom, and quiet, steadfast determination. The tale that began in the soft light of a humble village and blossomed within the hallowed halls of a royal palace had now come full circle, leaving behind a heritage that would inspire generations yet unborn. The concluding days of this era were marked not by grand declarations or the thunder of triumphant armies, but by the subtle, enduring influence of a visionary whose life was as fluid and persistent as the great river itself. In every corner of the land, from the bustling markets of Memphis to the remote, sun-dappled villages along the fertile banks of the Nile, the imprint of Neith's quiet revolution could be felt. Her reforms, initiated with the soft whisper of idealism and nurtured with the patient strength of experience, had reshaped not only the machinery of governance but also the very soul of Egypt. Across the kingdom, the institutions and practices that Neith had championed had taken root and flourished. The academies she had secretly established, once havens for forbidden ideas and innovative thought, had grown into centers of learning that bridged the ancient and the modern. Scholars debated in lively forums about the balance between tradition and progress, their discussions echoing with the voice of a mentor who had always believed that true power was not measured by the accumulation of wealth or the force of arms, but by the ability to uplift and empower one's people. In the realm of public life, the echoes of Neith's guidance resonated in the reforms that had transformed the everyday existence of ordinary Egyptians. Improved irrigation systems, reformed taxation policies, and an inclusive approach to religious practice had all become woven into the daily tapestry of life. Farmers, artisans, merchants, and laborers found new hope in systems that recognized their value. And the prosperity that followed was not the fleeting glory of conquest, but the enduring fulfillment of a society that honored fairness and shared progress. The legacy of her quiet wisdom had translated into a palpable vitality, a resilience that withstood the caprices of nature and the shifting tides of fortune. Yet, perhaps the most profound testament to Neith's impact lay in the hearts of those whose lives she had touched directly. Her own children and the multitude of young successors she had nurtured went forth into the world as living embodiments of her ideals. They carried with them not only the skills of statecraft and leadership, but also a deep, abiding commitment to compassion and justice. In every decision made in the corridors of power, in every measure of reform implemented in provincial towns, there remained a subtle, unmistakable echo of her teachings, a legacy that had been passed down like an heirloom, cherished and protected against the erosion of time. As the final years of Pepi II's reign blended into the quiet promise of a new dawn, the people of Egypt looked back upon this transformative period with a sense of collective pride and gratitude. They remembered the turbulent days when conservative voices had clamored for the status quo, and the daring moments when Neith's gentle insistence on reform had steered the kingdom away from potential ruin. Her presence in the palace had not been one of ostentatious power, but of a measured, reflective strength, a strength that had turned the tide of history through the simple, profound acts of listening, understanding, and guiding. In the twilight of her own life, Neith had never sought to cast herself as the heroine of grand narratives or to inscribe her name on monuments of stone. Instead, she had chosen a quieter path, a path of nurturing the minds and hearts of those around her, of fostering a culture where every individual could contribute to the collective good. Her legacy, by its very nature, was one of subtle yet enduring influence. It was a legacy that affirmed that the true measure of greatness is found not in the visible trappings of power, but in the invisible yet indelible impact one leaves on the lives of others. Now, as the ancient monuments of Egypt, pyramids that had stood silent witness to countless generations, temples echoing with the voices of both gods and mortals, caught the last glimmers of a fading sun, the story of Neith's life stood as a luminous chapter in the vast chronicle of human endeavor. Her journey, From the quiet innocence of a village girl to the revered position of a mentor and reformer in the royal court, encapsulated the timeless struggle between the immutable forces of tradition and the ceaseless currents of change. And in that struggle, she had emerged victorious not by suppressing the old, but by weaving it into a vibrant tapestry that embraced the promise of the future. In the hearts of the people, her memory would live on long after the final echoes of her footsteps had faded from the marble halls of the palace. In every new initiative, every act of kindness, and every decision made in the spirit of progress, the light of Neith's legacy shone forth, guiding Egypt through eras of prosperity and challenge alike. It was a legacy of hope and renewal, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the smallest flame of wisdom can ignite a beacon that outlasts the ages. Thus, as the curtain fell on this remarkable era of Egyptian history, the final chapter of Neith's journey was not an ending, but a promise that the seeds of compassion, nurtured by a visionary heart, would continue to flourish in the soil of a nation reborn. Her story, like the eternal flow of the Nile, was destined to be carried forward by the countless lives she had touched, a legacy that would inspire future generations to seek a balance between the lessons of the past and the dreams of tomorrow. And so, with the gentle embrace of twilight and the steadfast hope of a people united by a shared vision, the saga of Neith drew to a close. In that timeless moment, as stars emerged one by one in the infinite canopy of the desert night, her legacy whispered softly through the corridors of time, a quiet, enduring promise that the power of a compassionate heart can shape the destiny of nations and light the way for countless futures to come.